Hello everyone, I'm very glad that you listened to my story. Please give me a follow and like the video if you enjoyed it. Feel free to comment and provide feedback so I can improve the sound quality. Yes, we invite you to listen to part 2 of the series. Chapter 10, White Elephant. VES kept up his sales routine for a week. He visited different cities each day in order to maximize his exposure. Lucky always accompanied him, and with the help of his charm he managed to draw enough attention to his products to sell 100 mechs with less than 2 weeks to spare. He also accumulated a hefty 263 design points, but hadn't spent them yet. He thought it would be better if he received his next mission first. Congratulations for completing tutorial, part 3. You have received a 10-year combat mech production license lottery ticket. Please visit the lottery page to redeem this ticket. For completing the mission with time to spare, you have been awarded a bonus lottery ticket. The system sure loved lotteries, giving VES a bad feeling. His luck with the lottery so far had been mixed. Hey system, shouldn't you have sent me another mission by now? Please do not get addicted to missions. The mech designer system only offers missions in order to guide its users to the right path. Only babies require constant hand-holding. Are you a baby? VES practically spat blood. Who's the baby? You are a baby. In fact, VES felt rather terrible after hearing those words. He had indeed grown accustomed to the system's guidance. Now that he lacked a clear mission to strive towards, VES felt as if he was adrift. No, that's not right. I still have to prepare for the Young Tigers exhibition that start in 1.5 months. I also have to make progress in collecting 5 million credits to pay off my interest in 2 months. In other words, he needed to advance his skills and earn a lot of money. VES could work on that without the system generating another tutorial to tell him how to accomplish those goals. Too bad I can't earn any more completion rewards. That reminds me, I still need to use up last mission's rewards. Rubbing his palms, VES turned to the lottery page. He ignored the option to spend DP for a lottery draw and instead selected the option to use the tickets on hand. First, he activated his bonus ticket. Same as his previous lottery draws, it only entitled him to win an award from the lowest pool of prizes. The low-quality ticket snapped in half, revealing a familiar spinning wheel. VES vigorously yanked the wheel, causing it to make clacking sounds as the pointer spun over a rapid variety of rewards. The wheel slowed down after half a minute. Time appeared to slow down as the wheel ticked forward in an exaggerated fashion. It allowed VES to read the rewards hovering around the pointer. Endurance Candy. Alien Party Ears. 100,000 Bright Credits. Lantern of Imperfection. 1 Day Haunt. The pointer passed over the endurance candy, swept past the strange ears, and almost landed at the sum of credits. VES never objected to having more money. You have received a Lantern of Imperfection. The system ended up defying V's wishes yet again. Instead of receiving something that he could desperately use, he instead received an old-fashioned burnished bronze device that had obviously lived better days. Light the lantern and shine it against a mech or component to reveal structural flaws. The revealed flaws are only visible to the holder of the lantern. The lamp contains enough oil to burn for 5 hours. This could be useful. VES remarked, actually a little impressed by the generosity of the lottery. Machines that could analyze and reveal structural flaws existed, but only high-tech researchers and manufacturers were able to afford them. The assistance of such a device helped prevent defective material from being incorporated into a mech. For some parts, it was a lot more troublesome to replace once an assembler combined it with other parts and placed it in a mech. Too bad the lantern only lasted 5 hours. VES had no idea where he could buy additional lamp oil either. The system being its usual obstinate self remained silent to V's questions. Now it's time for the main show. VES smiled as he beheld the shiny golden ticket that had actually materialized in front of him. With a satisfying pull, he ripped the ticket in half. Festive bells rang out as a transparent man-sized pagoda dropped down from the roof. The pagoda consisted of 9 stories, and each story spun in an alternating direction. The first story spun to the left, while the second to the right, and the third back to the left, and so on. It all gave off a sense of grandeur to VES, as if Buddha himself had descended to give him a reward. The spectacle raised V's hopes. If the introduction already looked so impressive, then he surely wouldn't receive something cheap. Approach the pagoda to determine the tier of your reward. This was different. Puzzled, VES took a step forward, and then another when nothing special happened. Somehow, he couldn't get any closer to the pagoda no matter how many steps it took. A formless pressure arrived that pressed down on his body. Neither gravity nor air pressure changed. Everything else remained the same. Only the pagoda itself rose up in the air, dimming the workshop from V's sights. VES felt his vision dim from the pressure threatening to burst his head. Nevertheless, he clenched his teeth and kept putting one foot over another. When his consciousness was on the verge of passing out, the pressure disappeared. He fell to the ground as his breath wheezed as if he had run a marathon. The strange event affected him severely. He didn't exactly know what the pressure represented, but he hoped he did okay. Evaluation completed. You are eligible to draw a reward from the 5th tier. The pagoda transformed in response to the judgment. Its top 4 and bottom 4 stories slowed down their rotations, eventually falling still. Only the 5th story of the pagoda continued spinning its merry way. I don't know exactly what the pagoda did to me, but I guess did an okay job. VES concluded spuriously. He really had little clue why the system needed to resort to such mysticism in order to give him a simple production license. I really need to do better next time. I'm not resigned to remain average for the rest of my life. Now that the test had ended, VES easily approached the side of the pagoda. Its 5th floor continued to turn, whipping up a small current of air that blasted V's face. Even Lucky jumped down from the couch and inspected the strange floating structure. His face looked as if it was wondering what the fuck made it spin. A small, hand-sized bell appeared in midair. It was one of those bells that hung in ancient Terran temples. A small cord hung from the clapper that allowed the bell to make its ringing. Please pull the cord when ready. VES held the end of the cord and pulled firmly. The bell released a delicate tingling tone, causing the pagoda's 5th story to shine brighter even as its rotation lost its driving force. Like the regular lottery wheel, the pagoda's many sides portrayed various prizes. VES even recognized a few of their profiles and determined they were mostly last-gen models. This meant that the mechs first saw commercial release in the last 30 to 70 years, which was a fairly good range. Any mech models older than last-gen were considered obsolete. Their performance just couldn't keep up with the models currently in use even in an assisting capacity. The price of such mechs often matched the cost of raw materials and production, meaning VES would never be able to make any profit even if he handcrafted the mech in his own boutique. On the other hand, newer models also presented a few problems to VES. The more current the mech model, the stricter its license. Only trusted mech designers and large commercial enterprises received approval to buy them. In addition, newer designs incorporated more advanced technology that required special machines to fabricate. His 3D printer was just a run-of-the-mill current-gen product with no special features. It was capable of printing almost any of last-gen specialist components, but if it came to the current generation's fancy tech, then he may need to acquire millions or even billions of credits worth of production lines. The pagoda finally stopped its lumbering spin. V's stomach sunk as he recognized the white, medium-sized mech on its front-facing wall. Congratulations. You have received a 10-year production license of the following mech, National Aeromotive Caesar Augustus CA-1. Shit. VES muttered as all of his excitement drained from his expression. His comm burst up as VES received a new mail. He numbly tapped the message. It came with a lot of legal bullshit from the so-called Future Sons Technology Institution. VES skimmed through the lengthy texts. We hereby grant you with an unlimited production license of the Caesar Augustus CA-1, valid for a duration of 10 years from the signing of the included contract. No matter how many misgivings VES had about the CA-1, he was stuck with it. He quickly signed all of the contracts to get the paperwork out of his sight. He received another message a scant few minutes later, showing that the local had successfully approved of the contract. VES now possessed a legal license to produce the Caesar Augustus. Fucking double shit. VES felt like he wanted to cry but had no tears. The Caesar Augustus had a colorful history. VES happened to be familiar with it, because it had been a lesson in college on what not to do. The story started 50 years ago, when National Aeromotives, a renowned manufacturer of aircars and shuttles, decided to enter the mech market. They adopted a two-pronged approach. The first approach was to license a couple of mainstream designs, retool a couple of factories, and pump out loads of shoddy quality but cheaply priced mechs. The sheer quantity of mechs they made allowed them to figure out the intricacies of mech production quite rapidly. The quality of their mechs improved with each new production run. The second method was to allow Jason Kozlowski, the son of NA's CEO, to learn how to design mechs. He directly attended one of Stellan's premier mech design program. An important thing to mention was that Jason had been a spoiled brat. As could be imagined, Jason spent much of his time on Stellan attending parties and getting drunk off his ass. Only his superior genes enabled him to perform well enough in class to graduate. Once Jason returned home, he made a high-sounding announcement to the galactic press. He claimed that he would take just 1 month to design a fully original mech that would outperform all of the period's current generation mechs. Many industry insiders scoffed at such a boast. Forget about outperforming a current generation mech, many freshly graduated mech designers weren't even capable of designing a model that could outperform a last-gen mech. It took years of experience, learning many skills and acquiring many new technologies to even be capable of producing such a stellar mech. In any case, the public hung onto Jason's every word. A face this handsome wouldn't renege on his promise, right? After the announcement, a couple of black-suited men quickly brought the prodigal son away from the press conference and he was never seen again for a month. Some conspiracy theorists guessed that National Aeromotives wanted the public to forget about Jason's pledge. They received an unexpected surprise when Jason showed up to the press exactly 30 days later. A slightly disheveled but attractive young man then proceeded to introduce his month-long effort. He domineeringly named it after the first ancient Roman emperor, for it was indeed capable of outperforming most mechs of the current generation. Just its majestic posture and stately head design showed that Jason spent quite a lot of time matching the mech's aesthetics to its superb offensive power. The Caesar Augustus offered supreme offense and supreme defense in the medium weight class. By far the most expensive component was National Aeromotives' proprietary armor plating, originally designed to protect its most luxurious line of space shuttles from direct microasteroid impacts. Though expensive and difficult to produce, the armor offered superior protection that approached next-gen standards at the time. The CA-1 also provided a variety of offensive options. Its main weapons were its 2 wrist-mounted laser cannons. Missiles mounted on its shoulders provided some long-ranged indirect firing options, while a classic sword and shield built out of the same excellent material of its armor made the mech a monster in melee range. While Jason showed off a holographic model of the white-painted mech and its admittedly impressive capabilities, the experts combed over its specifications. They quickly couldn't hold in their laughter. The Caesar Augustus hid a bevy of issues underneath its perfect exterior. Jason crammed the CA-1 with so many gadgets that it affected the frame's integrity. Any damage that got past the armor could easily damage 5 essential subsystems, either crippling the mech or at least take it off the battlefield. In order to save space, many of those subsystems got tangled together, making it a pain in the ass for any technician to replace even a single faulty power line. The mech also lacked endurance. It peaked early but had no staying power. Its missile capacity could be emptied in seconds. Its wrist-mounted laser cannons built up an alarming amount of heat that Jason had done almost nothing to mitigate. And even if he did, the mech's average energy capacity meant it couldn't feed the weapons long enough anyway. Fortunately, Jason hadn't been conceited enough to add a flight system to the already over-engineered mech. Its energy would just drain faster in that case. All of this meant that VES was now stuck with one of NA's biggest commercial flops in recent times. The CA-1 was a white elephant that was difficult to produce and required constant babysitting. The most troublesome thing about producing it was that its special armor plating required a dedicated machine to produce. V's 3D printer wasn't advanced enough to produce it on its own. It was impossible for VES to produce the stock model of Caesar Augustus in 2 months. He lacked the time, money, skill, and equipment to accomplish such a clusterfuck of a production. And even if he did manage to cobble up a model, it was a question whether it would sell. However, the system awarded him with only just 1 production license, and for better or worse, VES was stuck with the elephant. It's not like I'm stuck with the stock model. I still have the mech designer system. If VES could use the system to redesign the CA-1, he might be able to come up with a less demanding version of Jason's first masterpiece. He wasn't ready to give up. A tentative plan already drew in his mind. Chapter 11, Cash Woes. VES made the biggest gamble of his life so far. If he won, he'd be able to produce a stellar mech and sell it for a hefty profit, making more than enough money to meet his impending interest payment. Success danced on a string, and each time VES stumbled, he risked the whole scheme coming apart. First, VES needed to grow accustomed to the Caesar Augustus. Fortunately, a real universe production license also counted as a virtual license in Iron Spirit's terms of service. He only needed to send a copy of the license agreement to the game's support to be able to tinker and sell the model in-game. As a last-gen mech in today's standard, the CA-1 counted as a 5-star mech in the game. This meant only older, more skilled potentates had the capability to buy the mech. The Caesar Augustus could be sold for a higher price, allowing VES to earn some actual profits from his sales if he designed a good enough variant. Iron Spirit's tiered leagues put a cap on how good a mech you could play depending on how well you progressed in the game. A Bronze Leaguer only had access to 1-star mechs. A Silver Leaguer had access to 2-star and 3-star mechs, though they could still play around with 1-star mechs if they wanted to have some fun. A Gold Leaguer had access to both 4-star and 5-star mechs. Most potentates that did not pursue a professional career in piloting mechs languished in this league. When one reached Platinum League or further, they gained unrestricted access to every mech, even the mythical 10-star mechs. However, the higher the tier, the more expensive the mechs cost to purchase and to repair if it ever got damaged. The fancier mechs even required weeks of in-game time to repair if they got completely destroyed. This meant that a fair number of Platinum and Diamond players still occasionally took a 5-star mech into a match for the purpose of earning some easy gold. This resulted in 5-star mechs being one of the most profitable tiers in Iron Spirit. High-performing models especially attracted attention. However, whether VES could break into this market was still a question, considering he lacked familiarity and expertise with the Caesar Augustus. In the 45 days of time before the Young Tigers exhibition started, VES needed to produce an extensive and realistic redesign of the CA-1 stock model. He needed to acquire new sub-skills and credits to buy virtual licenses of the components he needed for his redesign. In the meantime, he had to release a number of mech designs in the game in order to generate even more credits. Much of the money would be used to buy the real universe production licenses of the components he had used in the game. It sounded terribly complicated, but actually VES didn't need to change what he had been doing so far. Essentially, VES only needed to continue to design variants and put them onto the in-game market to sell. First, VES contacted Iron Spirit support in order to receive his virtual license. A production license of a last-gen mech already cost many millions of credits. He'd be damned if he was forced to purchase a 5-star mech's virtual license, which potentially ran into the millions. While he waited for his application to be approved, VES shut off all distractions and loaded the CA-1 into the Systems Designer program to begin tinkering with it. He wanted to pry apart its shiny armor and see how much of a mess its infamous internals looked like. Besides finding a replacement material for its armor, VES also needed to optimize its internals in order to turn the CA-1 into a competitive mech. One look and his hopes were dashed. It really did look like someone took a plate's worth of spaghetti and tried to stuff it in a small cup. It was doable, but it mashed everything together and left far too little slack. Cables, pipes and structural supports all crammed right next to each other, sometimes dangerously so. For example, if a certain cable broke and released electric sparks, it could ignite the gas released from a punctured pipe. Though VES knew these linkages could produce a catastrophe, he lacked the skills and resources to fix them. He could only document each fault he came across and come back to the problem later. VES spent the rest of the day combing over each and every component, to the point of dismantling the engine even if he understood little on how the advanced component worked. VES took a deep breath when he finished going over the Caesar Augustus. If he wanted to understand the model deeper, then he needed to fabricate the stock model. He took a minute to log into the in-game market and inspected the model's market conditions. Damn, that's expensive. An average CA-1 sold for about 50,000 credits, and that was for an in-game item. 5-star mechs belong to an entirely different market segment than 1-star mechs. The latter catered to kids while the former was sold to professionals. The raw materials required to fabricate the mech likely cost tens of thousands of credit as well. Since VES had set bottom prices to his virtual mechs, he hadn't earned even a single credit or gold even after selling over 100 models. I'm earning a decent amount of DP from every sale. If I raise the price, my mechs won't be able to stay competitive in the market. It's better if I don't. Change the prices. The Caesar Augustus represented a marvel of its time. In order to solve its many puzzles, VES required learning many new skills. But while he needed to save up a lot of DP, he also couldn't go without credits. VES switched to his mail and was relieved the game's support approved of his request to claim the CA1's virtual license. After loading the mech stock model in the in-game workshop, he received an unpleasant bill. So it costs about 40,000 credits in raw materials to build the base model. Even if the gold price looks a bit friendlier, it's not like I have a bag of virtual gold either. The lack of cash on hand stymied V's progress in researching the Caesar Augustus. There was only so much he could do to play around with the mech's design in the designer. VES had learned one important lesson when designing the Fantasia variants. A passionate mech designer needed to get hands-on with his own creations. Just making a few doodles in a design program didn't turn you into a veteran designer. A real expert got his hands dirty, putting each and every part together to see how it works and where any problems might arise. With only about 9,000 credits on hand, VES needed to scrounge up at least 31,000 credits from any source he could squeeze. He first checked the system but couldn't find any option to convert his DP to credits. Perhaps he could buy a few knickknacks from the shop and sell it for a tidy sum, but that option wasted too much valuable points. Should I call Melinda? VES wondered out loud. Family stuck together. If VES took the time to explain his plans and difficulties to his cousin, he was sure she'd lend him the credits. It's not right. It's due to my own poor planning that I'm facing a shortage on credits. If he cried and went to his family to bail him out, then sure, they might lend him a hand. It would also prove that he'd been in over his head. His aunts and uncles already disapproved of his career path. He wanted to avoid giving them ammunition. Perhaps sell Lucky's gems. VES had dug out half a dozen of these little shinies, and they all provided minor benefits when installed onto any mech. Any expert would love them if they realized they could improve their mechs by just installing a single jewel. Shaking his head, VES discarded the idea. Nah, that's a last resort. If he introduced these gems to the universe, a lot of powerful players would want to know their source. VES lacked the strength to isolate himself from the connected universe he lived in. It was child's play to track him down once he revealed any oddities. Forget about it. I need to figure out something else. What do I have that's valuable but not so much that it can be sold for some quick cash? The workshop. Out of the question. The building, 3D printer, and assembler constituted the most basic requirements of a mech manufacturer. VES couldn't part with any of it. He might as well make a deal with the bank about the loan if he gave up on the workshop. What else did he have? The licenses, 4-1. Since he had just read through the terms of the Caesar Augustus production license, he became well aware of what he could do with it. National Aeromotives didn't allow any shenanigans, nor did they accept any refunds of a license VES acquired through a charity grant. I still have a number of one-star virtual licenses. At this stage they're helpful, but not necessary to my plans. I wonder if I'm allowed to refund them. I bought them out of my own pocket after all. Perhaps their terms aren't as restrictive. VES searched the galactic net to see whether he could get some money out of the licenses. To his relief, the BSBH Corporation indeed set down a standard policy for returns. A virtual license could be relinquished within the week at no cost if the purchaser hadn't used it in any of his current models. If the owner possessed the license for more than a year, then the game wouldn't give one credit back. VES fell in the situation in between, having bought the licenses for more than a week but much less than a year. Iron Spirit allowed purchasers to get back 75% of their money if the licenses were not in use, and only 50% if they were. These terms only applied to licenses bought personally at normal prices. Licenses bought at a discount or granted by other institutions didn't count, and unfortunately for VES, the virtual licenses gifted by the system fell under this category. V's head spun after he combed through all the license agreements, but his work paid off. He knew what he could return and how much money he could claw back from the game. He visited Iron Spirit's support site and submitted a refund application. Astoria Experimental Flight System, 12,500 bright credits. Fayette ECM MK. 3,500 bright credits. Red Eye Assisted Aim Module, 4,999.50 bright credits. MTTR Removable Battery Pack, 1,500 bright credits. Harkenix Lite DMR version 3, 9,999.50 bright credits. Mirant 21 Ultralight Armor Plating, 5,000 bright credits. The total amount of credits VES expected to get back was 37,499 credits. He left out the Festive Cloud generator in his refund application because he grew rather fond of it. He intended to incorporate the small, innocuous in his other designs whenever it fit. As the support staff already received V's personal information when he made his previous licensing request, they worked quickly in processing the refund. An hour later, VES received a mail and a credit transfer that indicated his refund application met with success. With about 45,000 credits in spendable cash, VES was more than ready to start producing the Caesar Augustus, at least in Iron Spirit. Yet before he did so, he hesitated. The Caesar Augustus was a monstrously complex mech. While many processes had been streamlined in Iron Spirit's virtual crafting environment, it still remained a lifelike simulation. If VES failed to produce a mech that matched the stock model specifications, at the very worst he'd end up with an unsellable mech. A mech that remained stuck in place meant no new cash flow. Without another source of credits, he wouldn't be able to produce another virtual mech to advance his understanding of the model and earn more cash. All of this meant he couldn't fail at the first step. I'm not alone in this. VES realized as he slapped his forehead. Just because I can't beg for money from Melinda doesn't mean I can ask for advice. He activated his comm and made a call to Bentheim. Melinda's face popped up. Instead of the casual clothes she wore in her recent visit, this time she appeared in a formal uniform. Hey Vesey, what's up? I'm good, but I've got a little trouble. Okay, tell it to me briefly. I'm technically on shift so I need to get back to work soon. VES nodded and described how he received a grant license of the infamous Caesar Augustus. Naturally the charity the system set up looked squeaky clean on paper, so VES wasn't worried Melinda would dig into it and find anything improper. He emphasized his determination to tackle the challenge of mastering its design. Frowning, Melinda tooted her disapproval. They've sure thrown you off the deep end. The CA-1 is a beast of a machine, not something a fresh college graduate should come into contact with. This sounds pretty shady. Never mind that, Melinda. Just tell me if you can pry something loose from the Mech Corps or the Bentheim Planetary Guard. Without getting you into trouble, of course. Melinda furrowed her brow. I can ask the mechanics for some tips. I'll also see if I can dig something up from the archives. I'll pass anything I can find along to you as long as it's not classified or proprietary knowledge. Thanks a lot. I'm sorry for troubling you that much. Hey, your family, Vesey. I'd do anything to help. I gotta go back to work now, so see you later. Bye. With that done, VES turned to a different issue. With his DP steadily accumulating, he should make a tentative shopping list of sub-skills he needed to rework the CA-1. He opened his skill tree and started to comb over the available skills. Chapter 12, Duo Q. The battlefield finished loading, revealing a ruined city. Craters, broken mechs, and other war debris littered the landscape. Eerily, no life moved in the city. All was still, except for the desolate wind howling between the cracks of fallen skyscrapers. The silence ended as a brilliantly colored streak rose in the air. The Fantasia R2 Seraphim readied its long-ranged rifle and scanned the surroundings vigilantly. Come on. Let's stop hiding like rats. The seventh snake publicly declared. I'm right here. Shoot me if you can. Nothing responded to his taunts. The slim, gray phantasm that popped up from the side of a broken tank shook its head. I told you they wouldn't fall for it. Congratulations for revealing your position. Now get down and stop wasting your limited energy. Triceratops said as he tried to accustom himself to his new mech. The Seraphim cut back on its wing thrusters, allowing the mech to find some cover among the streets. This is why I hate 2v2. Everyone's constantly playing these clever strategies. The 1v1 arena is a lot more straightforward. The Phantasm's pilot kept his mech in the shadows as he explored their surroundings. I'm not saying you're wrong, but remember it was your idea to duo Q with two Fantasia variants. We have to play a little dirty if we want to win as a pair of light mechs. The 2 versus 2 arena provided a more intricate combat experience compared to the solo queue. With a teammate at your back, pilots had a lot more leeway in bringing a specialized mech to battle. For example, one player could pilot a heavy mech laden with missile launchers and magazines. Such a mech could rain death at long and medium range, but was as helpless as a kitten once an enemy got close. However, a teammate kitted out in a melee mech could keep off any mech that approached in the assurance that he won't get shot down from range. Compared to such a classical synergistic team-up, a combination of 2 light mechs hardly sounded optimal. Neither mechs possessed toughness and staying power. If they weren't able to shred their enemies apart in the first 10 minutes of a match, then they'd run out of juice. Luckily, light mechs still possessed some advantages. While Triceratops kept his Phantasm behind cover, the 7th Snake's Seraphim engaged its active scanning mode. The mech's hair sensors extended out and released invisible pulses, most of which bounced back when it encountered the plentiful debris in the map. My scanners are having a hard time picking up anything with all of this junk blocking my scans. My radar is full of false positives. I'm practically broadcasting my position here. It's better than nothing. At least you'll attract the enemy for us while I find a good ambushing position. The bait had been cast, and it only took a couple of minutes for the fish to bite. The Seraphim noted a large energy signature strolling down the main avenue. I got an incoming mech. With an energy signature this large, it's bound to be a heavy mech. No sign of its partner. They're playing the same game as us. Triceratops guessed as he moved his Phantasm a little closer in order to peek at the approaching opponent. Do you want me to stay hidden or find an opportunity to jump the heavy? The 7th Snake mulled both options before finally deciding on a course of action. It depends on the heavy. From what I can guess, it's likely to be a frontliner. Your Phantasm won't have an easy time peeling its armor if that's the case. Triceratops only carried a basic pistol in his Phantasm's limited loadout in order to make room for a sword. He could peel apart most mechs fitted out as riflemen but faced some trouble against heavy knight-type opponents. Don't do anything fancy. Just sit back and be ready to back me up. Okay, boss. While the Phantasm slunk into the bowels of a giant commercial complex, the Seraphim flew into the air and over the skyline. He easily caught sight of the enemy mech, which revealed itself to be a model unfamiliar to the 7th Snake. The bipedal mech wasn't built as a knight. Instead, it appeared to sport a shotgun and a pair of shoulder-mounted lasers. The energy weapons tracked the Seraphim in the sky and let loose a barrage of beams. The Seraphim snapped back with a couple of shots of his rifle, trusting his auto-aim to ensure it hit the heavy mech. The heavier the mech, the larger its energy signature, which meant that tracking systems had an easier time maintaining a lock. In the meantime, the flying mech cut back its thrust and dropped to the roof of a ruined apartment building, which cut its line of sight. Tops, the fucker's a striker. Its armor doesn't look too heavy, but he's sporting a really big shotgun. If he manages to draw a bead on you while you're closing in, you're dead. No worries, pal. He won't get me if I come from behind. Just keep attracting his attention. Triceratops cockily replied. The Seraphim flew back into the sky and shot a couple more times. He had an easier time tracking the heavy mech than vice versa. Even though the Seraphim ran a little hot, it's still a much lighter and less energy-intensive machine. The constant roof hopping ensured the heavy mech had to waste a lot of time reacquiring his targeting lock for his shoulder weapons. The 7th Snake wouldn't be so daring if the heavy mech wielded a long-ranged rifle, which the enemy pilot could fire on instinct instead of relying on computer-guided algorithms. In the lower tiers of Iron Spirit, such computer-based targeting always worked like shit. I'm in position, Snake. You want me to go in? The other guy's still lurking around. You might get sniped before you know it. I'll take that risk. I really want to peel this heavy guy's face with my sword. He's just so arrogant. The Seraphim took a few glancing blows from the lasers as it rose to fire another volley. The 7th Snake guessed that the pilot took over manual targeting for his shoulder-mounted lasers. That meant the enemy would take time to switch back over to his shotgun when pressed in close range. Okay, let's do it. I'll make a few dives to attract his attention. Don't wait too long or I'll get screwed. After taking a deep breath, the 7th Snake jumped off the roof, spread his mech's wings and made a high-speed dive towards the enemy, all the while releasing a rainbow stripe. His rifle awkwardly shot a steady stream of energy bolts, most of which dug shallow holes into the heavy mech's plating. The Harkonix light DMR fitted the Seraphim well. It possessed good range, a fairly high accuracy, and didn't gobble down too much energy. Unfortunately, its punch had always been a little undertuned among long-ranged rifles. The heavy mech, despite being under constant fire, practically ignored the DMR's shots, confident his armor could withstand the damage for the moment. The seventh snake gritted his teeth. "I've learned a few new tricks." The great thing about energy weapons was that the wielder could change its power on the fly. He flicked a special switch and paused his shots. Instead, the rifle's chamber started to accumulate energy and heat. As the seventh snake jinked his mech to the side, he fired his overclocked rifle after a full second of charging. A bolt 3 times the size of his regular shots escaped from the barrel. The energy projectile drew a thin white line as it streaked across the air and hammered the heavy mech's shoulder, straight up crippling one of its laser cannons. The heavy mech panicked a little. It jogged towards the nearest structure, eager to find some cover against the threatening fly buzzing over its head. Its remaining laser cannon ineffectively released a barrage of automated shots, most of them missing due to the Seraphim's speed and active ECM. Just as the mech barged through the entrance, Triceratops' phantasm dropped from the ceiling. Its emergence happened too sudden, and the heavy mech barely rotated its lumbering torso halfway before his sword sank straight down its neck with the full momentum of a falling mech. The heavy mech exploded into sparks as the sword managed to stab through its power source. The phantasm pulled out its weapon and flourished it with pride. "Ha ha ha, suckmatic!" Triceratops elatedly boasted as he approached the smoking mech and squatted up and down near its face. "You just got owned by the master swordsman. What are you standing for? Fucking move." The warning came too late. A thin but powerful line shot straight through the phantasm's torso, obliterating the cockpit in an instant. A loud sonic boom reached the mech moments later, not that it helped. "A sniper!" the seventh snake exclaimed, and flew full throttle in the direction of the previous shot. Why did he stay hidden to the point of letting his teammate die first? He already made a couple of conclusions after rethinking the hidden mech's previous behavior. This guy is confident in his marksmanship but not to the point of handling 2 opponents at once. So he let his dumb loud teammate take the lead, certain that we can't resist the bait. Once we're revealed, we don't have anything left to hide. While the Seraphim tried to vary his flight, the next sniper round snapped off half of its wings. The seventh snake struggled to maintain control. He chose to verve to the side but maintain his altitude. Whatever was left of his wings were redlining and were on the verge of shutting down. The seventh snake was in a bad position. Pinned down by a sniper and with half of his mobility gone, he hadn't even caught sight of his remaining opponent. What he did have was a general idea of where his enemy hid. He remembered clearly that the shot came from the direction of the tallest building in the city. "I can make it. I only need a couple of seconds." The Seraphim's remaining wings glowed red as the pilot redirected an ungodly amount of energy in its direction. A brilliantly white flare erupted out of the damaged wings, propelling the Seraphim with supreme speed in the direction of the skyscraper. The unexpected overload happened just as the sniper shot his 3rd round, causing it to miss narrowly as the Seraphim had already raced past its original trajectory. "I got you now," the seventh snake yelled as his wings finally broke apart from the stress. His overheated mech blared warnings at him as his rear torso's internals were beginning to melt. Since he couldn't accumulate any more heat, he decoupled and discarded his rifle, instead choosing to draw his combat knife. Sheer momentum drew the Seraphim onto the roof of the battlefield's only intact skyscraper. The light mech's feet skidded across the surface of the roof as the Seraphim did its best to bleed off its momentum. The opponent's model surprised the seventh snake. It was another phantasm. The gray model set its unwieldy rifle aside and drew its own combat knife in response to the Seraphim's approach. "This is going to be tricky. My mech has higher specs, but it's already half dead. My enemy is still fresh." The two mechs dove into each other, their knives clashing loudly while their limbs released punches and kicks. Both their cloud generators worked at full steam. The Seraphim generated a lot more clouds, but the black and gray smoke persisted in staying present. The duel between mechs progressed in the same manner. Knowing that his mech couldn't hold on for long, the seventh snake summoned all of his passion and unleashed it onto the opponent with only a casual regard for defense. The Phantasm player remained cool under pressure, focusing on pure defense in order to outlast his opponent. Once the Seraphim broke down, he could easily swoop down and claim victory. "As if I'd let you." The seventh snake yelled as he went forward and extended his mech's free arm, deliberately taking the Phantasm's cautious knife swing. The Seraphim's arm got sliced through, but the Phantasm's knife lost its momentum, rendering it still for just a fraction of a second. The Seraphim leaned over with its shoulder and bashed it against the unprepared Phantasm, knocking it off balance. The Seraphim then swung his knife with an underarm swing, cutting ruthlessly into the Phantasm's belly, right where the cockpit rested. "I've avenged you." The seventh snake sighed as the game confirmed his victory. "That was cool," Triceratops exclaimed in the party chat. "That last moment when you sacrificed your arm, I swear the enemy Phantasm just froze. I guess he's too new. His marksmanship is top-notch, but I think he lacks experience in close-quarters combat. Kind of funny how he chose to use that particular model as a sniper. It's not a bad choice in the lightweight class, but there's better options out there. It's the third Phantasm I've seen so far this week. The Fantasia variants from Chasing Clouds are beginning to pop up here and there in our local server." Triceratops let out a disappointed sigh. "They used to be our secret. You're practically his first customer. You got all of his mechs right." "Yeah, except for the 2RE, the one with the big behind. I just can't bring myself in piloting such a mech in battle. I wonder what Chasing Clouds is up to these days. He hasn't introduced a new mech for sale in a while." Despite the lack of new models, the Phantasm and Nomad enjoyed modest daily sales. In fact, a couple of potentates even bought the 2RE a couple of times as a joke. V's initial attempts to push his models onto young girls had achieved a small ripple effect. Other girls interested in the feminine-looking mechs bought them to play together with their friends. Boys wondering what the fuss was all about checked out the mechs in the store, and bought them as well for different reasons. Though not the cheapest or most effective mechs, the Fantasia variants succeeded in establishing a foothold in Cloudy Curtain's digital battlefield. They had never been bad models to begin with, they just lacked public exposure. While sales hadn't grown to the point that they had gone viral, VES nonetheless enjoyed a steady stream of DP even after his last tutorial mission had finished. Chapter 13, First Build. The skill tree featured a virtually endless amount of skills. With enough design points, VES could become the ultimate mech designer, capable of drafting a complete design in minutes with his left hand while pointing out the faults of someone else's work with his right hand. Naturally, VES lived in a world where time and resources were finite, so he didn't delude himself into thinking he'd ever reach that point in his lifetime. For all its merits, the mech designer system represented an incomprehensible piece of technology. Sometimes VES felt as if reality itself bent to its whims. He didn't know how sapient the program was or how it determined its own limits. If one day the system's sophisticated AI turned crazy, entire star systems might get embroiled into war. The system in fact always addressed him as a user, not an owner. It acted as if VES was just one client who conveniently picked it on the ground. If V's father hadn't given him the data chip, the system might have found a way to get its chip transported to some other person with the traits it preferred. This insecurity made VES question if the system was using him rather than the other way around. Certainly the system didn't work for free. Some powerful entity had gone through the trouble of designing a reality-bending software working on principles at least 1,000 years beyond humanity's grasp, and somehow it ended up in an average person's hands. And it was a question whether the system will stay in that person's grasp for long. For all VES knew, the system only treated him as a train. Once it reached its destination, it would leave without a word. So VES felt the need to milk the system while he still could. So despite all his doubts and questions, he still skimmed over the skill tree and made a shopping list of skills he needed to tackle the redesign of the Caesar Augustus. Assembly, upgrade to apprentice, 1000 DP. Assembler proficiency I, 200 DP. Assembler proficiency 2, 400 DP. 3D printer proficiency 2, 400 DP. Jury rigging 2, 300 DP. Electrical engineering, incompetent, 200 DP. Electrical engineering, novice, 500 DP. Electrical Engineering, Apprentice, 1000 dp. Medium Weight Armor Optimization I, 300 dp. These were the absolute minimum required to produce or to redesign a Caesar Augustus. VES needed to become much more familiar with the tools in his workshop in order to fabricate the CA-1's notoriously delicate components and put them together. And if he wanted to redesign the mech to make it easier to produce, then he needed to become proficient in electrical engineering pretty fast. Since VES was attempting to fabricate a stock CA-1 in Iron Spirit, he felt he should make a start on a purchase. He picked the cheapest option in the list and bought it immediately. You have spent 200 dp to acquire Assembler Proficiency I. Please view your status in order to confirm your skills. Design points, 98. Assembly, Novice, 3D Printer Proficiency I, Assembler Proficiency I. Evaluation, halfway stepped out of the stupidity cave. His status hadn't changed much except for the painful loss of so much dp. Now that he had the means to produce a virtual version of the Caesar Augustus, VES got ready. He logged in the game and entered his workshop. It was a good thing the machines in the workshop scaled to the mech you were working on. Iron Spirit remained a game even if it touted itself as a simulator, so it didn't want to scare people off by being too greedy. However, some people spread rumors that the game would introduce a future update that enhanced the gameplay experience of designers by forcing them to start paying for upgrades in their equipment. For now, the game simplified many things for VES which he felt grateful for. He only had to pay 40,000 credits to get the raw materials for the CA-1 delivered to his virtual workshop. Actually, the cost of raw materials didn't actually represent the value of the digital goods VES received. The pallets of metals, plastics, ceramics and other materials he received were just a bunch of data that could be infinitely duplicated. The payment acted more like a tax in another name. Some of it ended in the hands of the taxmen, in V's case the Bright Republic. Another portion got sent to the intellectual property owners of the many mechs and components VES used in his designs. Only a relatively small portion of credits remained as revenue for the BSBH corporation that ran Iron Spirit. Well, now it's time to transform these ingots and pellets into working components. VES rubbed his digital hands as he approached the virtual workshop's 3D printer. The house-sized machine was a souped-up version of the one he had in his real universe workshop. Much of its features and quirks carried over. With a familiar hand, VES started loading the blueprints of the frame, the most fundamental part of a mech, representing the skeleton that anchored the other components. Since it mostly consisted of solid pieces, with the occasional hinges and joints, the production occurred smoothly. The young Jason Kozlowski hadn't messed with it evidently. Still, due to the higher quality alloys used in its composition, the construction of the frame took up half a day. Next came the power reactor, the part that generated energy from energy cells or processed fuel. In general, the power reactor was a mature piece of technology. Developers only tinkered with it here and there to provide a few more % of efficiency or maximum capacity. They could be easily scaled to tailor a mech's weight class, and the CA-1 featured a fairly well-designed medium reactor. As a long-standing manufacturer of aircars and shuttles, National Aeromotives produced their own lines of power reactors. Jason borrowed a premium reactor available from the company's R&Amp Winking and Laughing division and stuffed it in his design. The reactor required extra precision in the fabrication of its many miniature parts. VES had printed engines from scratch before with the 3D printer, but this was the first time he took the trouble to print each millimeter-sized component one by one, and assembled them all together by hand. The tedious work took up an entire day. VES felt he did an adequate job, in that the reactor worked. Whether it performed well, that was for later. With that experience over with, his work on the engine proceeded a little smoother. Unlike the reactor, the engine took in energy to produce motive force. It allowed the mech to move its limbs and run like a marathon contestant. Much like the power reactor, Jason also borrowed it from his daddy's company, so it contained little innovations that made it troublesome to produce. VES grew highly appreciative of NA's craftsmanship when he finished assembling the engine. After that followed the musculature that made use of the motive force to move the mech's limbs. Cheaper mechs such as those used in agriculture used hydraulics, electrical engines, or a bevy of other cheap alternatives. Combat mechs required something more sophisticated, to better emulate a living being's responsiveness when pilot connected to them neurally. Lucky enough, the technology behind artificial musculature remained stagnant for over a century, so its production went like a breeze. Next came some of the most difficult parts, the computer chips and cabling that provided instructions and processing power to a machine. It represented the brains and nervous system of the mech. The chips demanded the most from the 3D printer, but they weren't difficult to produce since they were last-gen technology by now. The amount of miniaturization and other fancy stuff that went into the production of a chip could only be taken care of by an automated program. VES only needed to inspect the 3D printer beforehand of dust and faults before producing the tiny chips. Ironically, the cables required more finesse. As if aware his mech required too many cables, Jason chose a special mix of metals and insulators in different proportions depending on the size of the cabling. A single string of cabling could either be thicker or thinner at certain parts depending on its location. It made for a fine mess when you added in the sheer number of cabling, and VES felt he was growing mad at the end. After a long rest and a good night's sleep, VES continued with manufacturing the specialist components of the Caesar Augustus. These components differed wildly from each other, as Jason had filled in a shopping list of all the best commercially available components. The ECM, radar, boosters, gyroscope, cockpit, sensors and all the other components came from wildly different manufacturers. This meant that VES had to watch out for certain issues on one set of parts, but needed to pay attention to a different area with another set of parts. VES diligently read the documentation while he went over each component, so he hadn't been met with outright failures. However, many parts came off the 3D printer in a marginally acceptable state. VES lacked a reserve of raw materials to fabricate replacements for all but the worst parts. It just couldn't be helped. He could only blame Jason for blindly picking the shiniest toys and rely on his super-duper expensive industrial-scale workshop to reproduce them perfectly. With much of the interior of the mech done, VES turned to the most expensive part of the mech, its proprietary armor. 30 years ago, a manufacturer required a dedicated machine from National Aeromotives to mix a bunch of metals into a highly compressed piece of plating. Fabrication technology advanced since that time, and now that the armor's formula became semi-public knowledge with the release of the CA1's licensing options, all modern 3D printers could reproduce it as long as they weren't too cheap. The Caesar Augustus required a large amount of plating for a medium mech. The large, bulky sword and shield also added to its total weight, almost pushing the mech into the heavy weight class. The production of the plates came with its own challenges. Due to V's inexperience, some of its armor plates came out of the 3D printer with higher than normal stress or other issues. If the virtual 3D printer wasn't so good, VES might get stuck with a number of half-failed plates. Damn. VES sighed as he finally finished producing all of the CA1's components. This is more tiring than I thought. There's a world of difference between 1-star and 5-star mechs. Hundreds of years of technological progress only made things harder to build. I really miss the simple Fantasia. The challenges he faced with this step alone broadened his vision of what mechs were capable of. Working on a near-modern mech meant for elites taught VES what this target segment looked for in a war machine. An elite mech has to meet different requirements than regular frontline mechs. They pack as much armor and punch as possible in a reasonably mobile package. Energy efficiency isn't necessarily a problem when you can swap fuel or energy cells from a support group on the field. Jason wasn't wrong to design the CA1 along those lines. He just went a little bit too far with it. Competing mechs could do almost everything the Caesar Augustus could do, but lasted a little longer in the field. Sometimes that extra time counted, so procurers wanted to be safe than sorry by picking the less exaggerated choice. The Caesar Augustus was also a bitch to maintain in a chaotic battlefield, so generally only wealthy ace pilots who cared a lot about peak performance bought the models. Next up, assembly. To assemble the mech from scratch, VES first put together the frame. The parts that composed the mech skeleton were built to be big and robust, so VES easily got to practice his enhanced assembler sub-skill without much risk. The skill improved his ability to manipulate the lifters and arms that composed the assembler module. The parts that he wanted frozen stayed still, while the parts he wanted moved got shifted around just enough but no further. As VES already assembled the power reactor and engine by hand, he only needed to place them delicately in the slotted areas of the frame. After that, VES added the other components and systems that made up the functionality of the mech. The biggest piece was the cockpit, followed by the energy storage unit that stored the replaceable energy cells. All the smaller systems followed, such as the sensors and boosters. Finally VES reached the most troublesome stage. All of the components had been installed on the mech, but they remained isolated to each other. VES had to connect each of them together in a mishmash of cables and pipes. In between these relatively delicate components, VES also had to squeeze in a lot of artificial muscles. Sometimes that led to very tight fits. The work tested VES the utmost. He screwed up many times, having to remove the cabling and do the placement all over again. Sometimes he had to cram a bundle of cables through a narrow opening between pipes by force. The stress and frustration caused VES to slip his fingers sometimes, causing unforgivable mistakes in the assembly. After a nerve-wracking day of playing plumber, VES finally reached the end stage of the assembly. He spent a much more leisurely time putting the armor plates together. Sometimes the improper cabling caused the plates to fail to adhere in its position. VES sometimes had to hammer the problem areas lightly in order to cram the pieces of armor in their place. It proved the parts he fabricated were of substandard quality. "It's finally done," VES said as he sprawled on the ground in exhaustion. The diagnostics and debugging still ran in the background, but Iron Spirit took care of most of the issues that popped up at this stage. "What do you think, system? Did I do a decent job? Why aren't you giving me an evaluation yet?" The Mech Designer system only evaluates designs, not copies. Since you are not the designer of the Caesar Augustus CA-1, you will not earn any design points even if you manufacture it 1,000 times. Please work hard and make your own designs. That made sense. The system didn't want to bring up a technician or a factory supervisor. The main job of a mech designer was to make designs. The act of fabricating a mech in person was only done in order to understand the mech better or to ensure its quality. VES could only rely on the numbers given by Iron Spirit in judging how well he built his first Caesar Augustus. And from what he read so far, the news wasn't looking good. Chapter 14, Fiddling. Reading through the mech specifications, VES felt all of his satisfaction disappear. He accomplished the difficult task of building a highly advanced mech, to be sure. His lack of understanding and his poor proficiency with the equipment caused several problems with the mech. The Caesar Augustus he fashioned paled in comparison to a factory-standard stock model. Several criteria showed a few percentage points of deficiencies. Those percentage points might as well be a chasm in the mech market. When pilots wanted to buy a stock mech, then they at least demand them to adhere to standards. There was no way any sane pilot paid full price for a substandard licensed copy. VES took the time to search up the Caesar Augustus and its variants, what few they were. Unlike in the real universe, the Caesar Augustus enjoyed a little more popularity. Logistical issues such as limited energy mattered little when you played Iron Spirit's shorter game modes, such as the 1v1 and the 2v2 arenas. The tricky problem of frequent repairs could be solved with a wave of the hand as the game took care of everything as long as you had gold or credits to spend. The players who bought the Caesar Augustus tended to be more affluent than normal, but also demanded more of their mechs. Their willingness to pay a little more for a higher-performing mech didn't help VES at the moment because his own product was trash. Still, I have no choice but to get rid of it. I've pumped a fortune of credits in its virtual construction. I should at least be able to recoup the cost. With no other choice, VES switched to the sales page and put his first Caesar Augustus on sale. He put a tentative price of 45,000 credits. The price range made it seem like a deal, even if it didn't perform up to spec. Caesar Augustus CA-1. Tier, 5-star. Base model, Caesar Augustus CA-1. Purchase price, 750,000 gold, minus 50%. Premium price, 45,000 bright credits. Hopefully some schmuck will snap it up without reading the specifications too deeply. Otherwise he'd have to go back to the store and lower the price again in order to get rid of it faster. He still lacked a lot of credits and had no reserve left to build another virtual mech. "I'll check back in a few days," VES said hopefully, but he could not keep out the grimness from Chitone. "One thing's for sure. If I want to untangle this clusterfuck, I desperately need to become proficient in electrical engineering." VES checked his status, and found he had gained enough DP to afford the first skill in the skill tree. As a major skill category, electrical engineering was cheap to learn but very expensive to master, but that was a problem for later. Right now, he spent 200 DP to acquire the first tier of the skill, which the system called incompetent. Raw information and knowledge streamed into V's mind. More knowledge than he could handle tried to nestle within in his brain in a span of minutes, and it almost caused him to blank out. He dropped to the floor and tried to hold his screams as he held his head. Countless irrelevant pieces of data pressed against his mind. Lucky even got frightened enough to jump up to a cabinet, wary of any intruders. The pressure eased off after 10 or so minutes. VES let out deep breaths as he tried to regain his composure. Most of the data seemed to have been tossed to the back of his mind, inaccessible for the moment. Perhaps the subsequent skill upgrades unlocked portions of it. Strange. In order to regain his calm, he took a break, taking Lucky out for a walk. He and his father lived near this stretch of forests and plains for many years. The house of his childhood in the suburbs had been sold, the new owners taking in the property with gusto. Instead, his father moved to build a second-hand modular workshop just outside the town. Its location closer to nature afforded better privacy and made sure nothing else got damaged if his workshop blew up for some reason. Do you remember a life before the system gifted you to me? The gem cat meowed with a puzzled tone as he explored the nearby bushes. Don't know, huh? VES said as he stretched his arms and raised his head to look at the wispy colorful sky. This is my home planet. I lived here for almost my entire life. The only time I left was when I went to college in the capital. The planet Rittersberg seated the government of the Bright Republic. They heavily controlled the climate in order to make it optimal for human to live there. Sprawling cities, fancy villas and vast stretches of Terran and indigenous wildlife turned it into a paradise, an expensive one, but idyllic nonetheless. Still, VES vastly preferred the rugged and untamed lands of Cloudy Curtain. The terraforming corporations who transformed the ball of rock into a life-sustaining planet only stuck around to do the bare minimum. They left with their fat paychecks even as incongruities popped up. The local air smelled different than the standard Terran norm. The summers never lasted long and it was cloudy pretty much every day. This was his home. He was an inhabitant of Cloudy Curtain first, and a citizen of the Bright Republic next. Few woes occurring in the rest of the galaxy concerned him here on this quiet planet. This corner of the galaxy was on the outskirts of civilized territory. It held few stars, not much exotic resources and only a few small alien polities shared the Bright Republic's rimward borders. Mech battles only happened occasionally. Besides the wars between the Republic and the aggressive Vija Kingdom, the most the Mech Corps had to handle were lone criminals and small bandit groups too weak to prey in the bigger neighborhoods. This led to a life of peace and stability, an enviable state of affairs for some people. His father purposely left the livelier planets of Rittersberg and Bentheim in order to make his home in snoozy Cloudy Curtain. When VES grew up on this planet, he felt no different from his classmates and other people around him. Only when he studied at Rittersberg did he realize that the rest of the galaxy moved in different speeds. It both scared and excited him. Eventually, VES firmly entered this complicated, murky world in order to fulfill his dream to become a mech designer. Just this decision alone brought him into contact with the government, trade associations, suppliers and more. He felt connected to the galaxy, as if anything he did affected the rest of human civilization. Only a little, but it felt as if his existence mattered. What kind of crap am I thinking? I should go back to work. VES decided, and led Lucky back to the workshop. In the meantime, he made a call to Melinda. Hi cousin. Hey VES, I was about to mail you back this weekend. So do you have any results you can share with me? Melinda sent a few documents over the interplanetary comm. The Caesar Augustus is a rare beast, so the Mech Corps never officially purchased any of its models. However, it did come into contact with a few models piloted by pirates fleeing the authorities of the bigger empires. They even captured one intact, more or less. Did they do anything with it? The Mech Corps may be penny pinchers sometimes, but they won't throw away a functional mech. An ace pilot took it over and piloted it for a few years before it got embroiled in a border skirmish with the Vesians. It lost its left leg and a chunk of its waist. When it came back to the hangar, the Corps decided it was more trouble than it was worse trying to fix it up again, so they sold the rest for scrap. Damn, so it's gone now, right? Yup. Recycled down to the seats. Well, there goes my hope of refurbishing it. So anyway, the mech core must have learned a thing or two about the CA-1, right? Nothing officially, but I tracked down one of the technicians that serviced the CA-1. That was impressive, and also a little dangerous. Melinda could get in trouble if she harassed a veteran too much. Don't worry about it, cousin. Melinda smiled over the comm. He found the Caesar Augustus to be a bitch to maintain, but he still misses it. He freely gave me the notes he kept about the mech. I've sent it through this connection, so you should already have them in your storage. That's going to help out a lot. Thanks for taking the time. I'm looking forward to what you can do. Be sure to give me a call and show off your work when you finish a design. Will do. When VES returned to his workshop, he perused the documents Melinda sent over. The retired technician had conveyed his thoughts in a haphazard manner, with no apparent order in his many ideas. VES spent quite some time to iron out the disordered words and plentiful jargon into something legible. What he got opened his mind. The technician was evidently proficient in improvisation and jury rigging. He kept the Caesar Augustus going for years even without official replacement parts from National Aeromotives. Though the notes contained no schematics or blueprints, just getting to know the changes and the reasoning the technician came up with already gave VES ideas for his own customization plans. His newly gained skill in electrical engineering also helped him puzzle out the crude drawings of rerouted cables and shifted systems. The retired technician spent some of his spare time trying to come up with a better layout for the most problematic tangles. Not many of them looked viable, but the technician succeeded in coming up with some optimizations, making the mech a little easier to maintain. After digesting the material, VES had the urge to work on a design immediately. He quickly switched over to the designer and started incorporating some of his ideas on the Caesar Augustus. He worked on the easy solutions first. He moved a few components, sometimes shifting them just a millimeter, other times swapping them from left to right. Following these actions, he uncrossed a couple of cables and rerouted them through a different channel. When VES stepped back and admired his changes, he realized the technician's suggestions did have a basis on reality. The modifications he made according to the suggestions made the mech a little less troublesome to produce and maintain. Now that I've picked all the low-hanging fruit, it's time for the real work to start. VES intended to redesign CA-1 practically from the ground up. Just making a few changes here and there just didn't cut it. So VES bit his lips and started to test the viability of more drastic modifications, some suggested by the technicians and some he figured out himself after handcrafting its design in the game. The changes he sketched improved the base model only incrementally. With limited knowledge and a lack of component licenses, VES faced limitations everywhere. At its heart, a humanoid mech imitated the workings of the human body. Though hundreds of years of progress have made a mech's mechanical workings increasingly more sophisticated, it still adhered to the same rules. If VES arbitrarily cut off a few cables or messed around with its proportions, he might cause the design to cascade into an unworkable mess just like if he messed around with an actual human body. Some people started to question whether mechs would evolve to constitute life. VES wasn't interested in these philosophical discussions that popped up every once in a while in college. He did not delude himself into thinking he was playing God by fashioning new mechs. VES always thought his classmates who talked that way treated the mech designer occupation as a luxury. VES preferred to hang out with the more down-to-earth crowd that treated the job as a way to assist the mech pilots that defended their homes. A week went by. As VES made some accomplishments, he also earned enough DP to upgrade his electrical engineering skill to novice. With his improved insights in electrical engineering, he also simplified a couple of problematic spots. This necessitated a drop in performance, but what he lost in specs he gained a lot more in ease of manufacturing and repair. While VES had made some minor progress in taming the beast, it still maintained its essential wildness and ferocity. I still have a long road ahead, but I'm reaching the limits of what my skills and imagination can do. He only managed to come up with a half-finished design. While he wanted to wait until he could afford a few more skills with his steady income of DP, he had to validate his design by fabricating it personally. Without getting hands-on, all of his work remained theoretical. VES finalized the design when he reached the limits of what he could do. He named the variant the Nero after a famous person who lived in the same time period as Caesar Augustus in ancient Terran history. Frankly, VES knew very little about history. He just made a casual search on the galactic net for some cool names and Nero popped up as some dude with a mixed evaluation. This fit in nicely with what he thought about which is what he also thought about his recently finished design. At least he hadn't gone ahead and named the design the Bastard Son. The system's evaluation of the design was mild, to say the least. All of its core systems and armor remained the same as its stock model, so the system gave him a low rating for effort. The only thing VES managed to pry from the system was a base reward of 10 DP due to the design being based on a complicated last-gen model. He was ready to start fabricating a virtual mech. When VES logged into Iron Spirit and visited the market section, he found to his surprise that someone actually bought his half-baked Caesar Augustus. The Grand Green Road. The username sounded like a complete stranger. VES checked his friends list and found nothing. Searching the galactic net only revealed that the player wasn't a celebrity. Who the fuck is the Grand Green Road? Well, whoever he was, he saved VES a lot of trouble. Whatever. Since the mech got sold, I have enough credits to fabricate the Nero. He threw the identity of the buyer to the back of his mind and entered the virtual workshop to go to work. He was eager to see if the Nero he produced could match the specs of a standard CA-1. Chapter 15, Father. The center of the Bright Republic lay in Rittersburg. Though Bentheim surpassed the founding planet with its vibrant economy and liberal housing regulations, Rittersburg still remained the seat of government of the 100-planet state. Only inherited and distinguished families were allowed to live in its luxurious housing districts. In one such district, a row of modest villas rested alongside a placid river. In the backyard of one of those villas, a man reclined in a folding chair as he held a fishing pole in front of him. An empty bucket lay beside him, waiting for fishes to carry back home. An aircar approached the guarded district. After the local defense systems checked its transponders and scanned the vehicle for any threats, it approved the vehicle's approach. The aircar smoothly descended onto the landing pad next to the garage. The door opened to reveal the chiseled face of a man in uniform. The man marched briskly towards the back, as if already aware the occupant of the villa spent his time there. Father. Benjamin Larksinson turned his gaze away from the bobber and beheld the new arrival. Arkansas. As carefree as ever I see. You've even taken the time to visit your dear old dad. How are the kids? Rambunctious as ever. The uniformed man smiled a little as he loosened up. I don't know how you managed to raise all 7 of us. I had a good wife, as do you, Arkansas. No matter how much the service takes up your time, don't forget your family. You can do anything if the happiness of your wife and children are at stake. It's half the reason why I made it this far. Ark nodded. Speaking of which, I might have news of my elder brother. Wrinkle. I have no idea what he's embroiled himself with. He's always been the most reticent of you bunch. He loves his own son like a treasure, so why did he not come to me? Does he think I will treat him any less? Pa. We've spent some time digging into Wrinkle's movements of the last year before he disappeared. There's a couple of times when he went off the grid. I suspect he went incognito in order to visit a conflict zone. Accounting for travel time, it should match the times he couldn't be traced. Benjamin grimaced at those words. Pirates. What has my boy done now? I didn't raise any of you to make dealings with the scum of the galaxy. The trail ends there, unfortunately. We don't possess enough information to infer which conflict zone Wrinkle frequented. We're analyzing all of the data devices he left behind, but he's been very disciplined with the trails he left behind, so we're not expecting much from those sources. Sighing, Benjamin closed his eyes as he leaned back on his chair. Tell me about my grandson. There are some anomalies surrounding VES that paint a suspicious picture. While he had been an unremarkable student in the Rittersburg University of Technology, he's performing above average in the month and a half that he's been active so far. It's as if he's given wings now that he's free. Benjamin smiled at the report. I always expected VES to catch up to his potential once he got over his inability to join our career path. I'm glad he finally found his way and embraced his role in the world. The financing still remains troublesome. Despite receiving a production license grant, VES is unable to leverage this asset. If nothing unexpected happens, he will fail to meet his impending interest payment. Father, will you give him a hand if he's come up short? No. Not even at the very last moment. Wrinkle went through the trouble of procuring those loans, so we should see his plans through the end. I don't believe he has lost grip of his son even if he's indisposed. The river flowed gently along the stream. The sun shone brightly in the skies. A serene calm descended on the pair as the father kept fishing while the son organized his notes, sending over the relevant documents to his father's com. "How's my grandson's work? He's not making more Fantasia variants, is he? He sold most of his one-star virtual licenses to raise money. He's completely committed to mastering the Caesar Augustus. I bought his first mech, which is unmodified, and tested in simulations. Was it up to par? Not really." Ark shook his head in disapproval. If VES produced a mech as shoddy as that in the real universe, he'd get chased away as soon as he tries to certify it at the association. In most of civilized human space, weapons such as mechs faced stringent controls. Designers and manufacturers were only allowed to produce a mech if they owned the necessary licenses. When they finished producing a mech, they needed to be certified at the local mech trade association before it receives permission to be put on sale. The MTA was a transnational non-profit organization with branches in pretty much every human state. A colossus of the mech world, they regulated the civilian production and sale of mechs. Most states like the Bright Republic gave them official backing to do so in their territories because they were good at it and adhered to strict neutrality, never overstepping their bounds. In any case, if Ark said that V's product couldn't pass the MTA's strict certification, then he had a long road ahead of him. If VES managed to shore up his weaknesses within a month, then he may be able to produce a mech that passed certification. But that required a lot of progress in a very short time. It comes down to time, huh? Benjamin mused. If the interest payment didn't hang over his head, VES wouldn't be rushing with building a mech beyond his capabilities. It's convenient timing on the bank's part that they chose to hang such a term over his head without compromising a single step. Ark shifted another set of documents over to Benjamin's com. "We've looked at the Cloudy Curtain Planetary Bank. The shareholders and employees are clean. Their books are also in order. The situation is just as it appears. The bank made a negative assessment of the viability of V's business, and just wants to claim the assets before they depreciate in value. Greedy bastards. I'm glad to hear they're nothing more than that, though. Saves me the trouble of another visit. According to the latest reports, VES should be working on a new virtual mech right now. Do you want me to snap it up when he puts it on sale?" "Yes, and keep buying one of every variant he sells in that game of yours. I want you to track his progress in this way and give him a little push while he's at it. Don't buy any more, though. I don't want him to grow complacent." "Understood, Dad. Anything else?" "Keep digging into the so-called Future Sons Technology Institution. Any organization with the clout to grant a production license of the Caesar Augustus shouldn't be an obscure player. We still can't make much progress on that front since they're based in the new Robarth Empire. Their corporate laws are too opaque, deliberately so. Even if we use our sources, they won't be able to get anything." Benjamin spat to the side. "Ark, I don't need to know the shareholders or donors of the institute. Just find out if a new Rubarthan or a foreigner taking advantage of the local laws is pulling the strings. That should be doable. I'll pass on your instructions. That should be enough on your plate for now. Leave me to my fishing. I'll go over the documents later and send you my thoughts in a day or two." "Very well. Goodbye." As Ark left the villa, Benjamin relaxed his eyes and smiled. He held a steady grip on his fishing pole. What kind of father abandons their son? The fish still didn't bite. Back on Cloudy Curtain, VES released an exhaustive breath as he finished fabricating the Nero in Iron Spirit. The customized Caesar Augustus model still had its problem spots. However, with prior experience in the various modifications he made to mitigate a few bad spots, VES encountered fewer risks during fabrication. The CA-1A Nero, as he named it, still caused some difficulties, particularly with its armor plates which VES hadn't modified. Finding a solution for the armor plates. The system offered a fallback. Its store sold various goods as long as VES could afford the price. The cheapest alternative armor he could find in the shop cost at least 1,000 DP. VES preferred not to buy them because the armor plating was several generations behind current standards. No one wanted to buy a CA-1 variant with crappy armor. A big part what made the Caesar Augustus was its sword and shield, which were made out of the same expensive alloys as its armor. Cutting back on the armor meant not just lowering the CA-1's defense, it also affected its offensive power. Luckily, it wasn't a problem he needed to concern himself with today. VES put the Nero on sale once he ironed out the remaining kinks revealed by the last-minute tests. CA-1A Nero. Purchase price, 950,000 gold, minus 50%. Premium price, 60,000 bright credits. Charging 60,000 bright credits for the Nero was stretching the model's value. It only offered a marginal improvement in performance and a slight decrease in repair cost to any player interested in a Caesar Augustus model. Still, seeing how his previous mech got sold fairly quickly, VES hoped his handcrafted Nero at least provided higher profits. He wanted to see some validation in the work he put in his models. Now that he finished the Nero, VES ought to go back to the designer and create another variant. The problem was that VES couldn't achieve a breakthrough in either improving the CA-1's internals or replacing its armor. It came down to a lack of skills and resources. I can't afford the things I need. VES sighed. Stupid system. Why did the pagoda thing reward me with a Caesar Augustus? He checked his status again in order to see how much catching up he still had to do. Design points, 175. Electrical engineering, novice. Evaluation, an all-rounder in incompetence. I've acquired a decent amount of skills, but I've split my attention. VES concluded as he saw how many low-level skills he currently possessed. I should either finish upgrading my electrical engineering or pick up medium-weight armor optimization. Raising my assembly sub-skills can wait for later once I start fabricating the real thing. Nothing changed after staring at his status for 10 solid minutes. Come on, system. I'm at the end of my rope. You haven't sent me a mission for a while now. Why not give me something to work with? Do you expect me to beg my grandpa for a loan or something? You have received a new mission. Please check the mission page for the details. Yes. Finally. VES celebrated as he raised his fists with a grin. He then knelt on the ground, kowtowing towards the computer terminal. You are my god, system. He kept praising the system and its timely missions, completely forgetting the times he cursed the system for giving him missions with ridiculous demands. Mission, Tutorial Part 4, X Factor. Difficulty, B rank. Prerequisites, completed Tutorial Part 3. Some have characterized the profession of mech designer to the modern Prometheus. Are mechs purely machines, or are they something more? Please design a mech with a prominent X Factor, ranking at least E or higher. Reward, 1 random 10-year medium armor production license, 200 tons of raw materials reserved for armor production. The rewards attracted V's attention. With a production license and a couple of containers of raw materials in the bag, VES faced much less financial pressure in gathering the other materials required to fabricate his desired CA-1 variant. This mission was essential to his future planning. Aha. VES scratched his head. What the hell is X Factor? User, please research diligently and form your own answer to the riddle of X Factor. There are no wrong answers. Okay. Whatever. VES had the feeling this problem was a lot bigger than anyone thought. Chapter 16, Pieces of the Puzzle. From the esoteric manner in which the system described the X Factor, VES felt a headache coming. What was all of this stupid talk about Prometheus and life? A mech was a weapon, a tool in which humanity used to wage war. In ancient history, when humans wanted to find a means in which to leverage a power greater than the human body could carry, they turned to horses. When cavalry added their weight to a charge, a normal foot soldier possessed few means to resist such force. With the rise of machines and the fuels that could power their insatiable appetites, warfare evolved. The deadliness of a single soldier remained limited, but could be multiplied if they operated tanks or airplanes. Though the uses of infantry never faded out even until this day, the primacy of machines over men in matters of warfare reigned supreme ever since. The introduction of mechs to the battlefield reinforced this principle. Melding the human form with the awesome power of machinery, the mechs provided humans with an excellent means to wage warfare on the ground. In the past 400 years since the first mech stomped all over a battalion of infantry and tanks, they remained the mainstay of human planetary warfare. VES thought deeply and could not rack his brains in figuring out where this elusive X Factor fitted in. It sounded a lot like the metaphysical bullshit that remained a popular topic of conversation among the dreaming students back in college. Man, why am I trying to figure this out myself? VES shook his head. He sat down in front of his terminal. Let's see what the galactic net has to say about the X factor. The topic appeared to be obscure, but due to the sheer size of the galactic net, VES found plenty of sources. Does the X factor exist? An interviewer asked the older gentleman across the seat. I do not know. The professor replied, shaking his head. In all my years of researching and developing the neural interface that allows pilots to control a mech like their own body, I have never come across a case where the mech provided measurable feedback to the pilot. The vague stories I've heard about the X factor all originates from the mouths of mech pilots, who aren't exactly the most authoritative voice in the area of mech design. So you're saying it might be a hoax? I try to keep an open mind, so I'm not inherently dismissing the theory. If someone is able to present me with stronger proof in the form of hard data, then I'd happily convert into a believer. But from what I have found out so far, the primary sources that speak about the X factor are mostly veteran pilots suffering from borderline PTSD. Age, combat stress, and mental injuries all contribute to hallucinations that mislead them to think a mech is doing more than it should. We haven't conducted enough research on the impact of prolonged use of the neural interface to a pilot's psyche. All right, so you remain skeptical. The interviewer nodded. Then Professor, let's change to a different tack. Do you believe that mechs are alive? The academic let out a contemptuous laugh. Let me ask you a question for once. Do you believe that mechs can think for themselves? At some level they do. All mechs possess computing power. Without processors to regulate a mech's operations, the pilot would be overwhelmed by irrelevant data. They act as the unconscious mind of a human's body. Since the infrastructure for an unconscious mind already exists, who's to say a mech can't also support a thinking mind? Just because they have the potential to do so doesn't mean that makes it so. In your eyes, there's a small gap between processing data and independent thought, but in my eyes they are separated by a chasm as wide as the distance between galaxies. We humans have worked on artificial intelligence for thousands of years, but for all our advances we have merely achieved a facsimile of sentience. Computers still can't independently dream or formulate their own desires without an actual human hand-holding their train of thoughts. And never mind these complex desires. The most fundamental part of life is to reproduce, and I have never seen a mech become attracted to another. The interviewer laughed modestly. Certainly that's true. However, they don't have to lift a finger to reproduce themselves. Us humans are doing it for them by developing ever newer mechs. Perhaps we might live in a future someday where the number of mechs outnumber the humans piloting them. Are we raising our own doom? What do you think about that scenario? Accumulating war material is a natural state of affairs. No matter if you have 1 mech or 30 mechs, the pilot remains firmly in control. All the conspiracy theorists out there who believe that mechs are the remnants of an ancient machine civilization don't know what they are talking about. The first mechs have been developed using gradual advances in technology, all neatly documented and traceable without any alien influence. The interview went on for a few more minutes along the same vein. VES had an inkling of what the X factor was all about. I suppose most people think just like me, that mechs don't think for themselves. VES mused as he scratched his head. But can I still say the same now that I have the system? VES had gone through a lot since the first time he received the system. He interacted through its menu like it was a software program, but he also talked to it like the system was an individual. Certainly the system responded like a living being, even showing some emotion underneath its robotic exterior. The question was if displaying these emotions merely fell into a programmed response. Was the system programmed to follow instructions all this time? God damn it, this is just like the chicken and egg problem. It just goes round and round. He learned to disregard problems he couldn't solve in a short time. Ordinarily he'd just ignore this issue, but since the mission forced him to figure out the X factor, VES had no choice but to continue racking his brains around the question of life. Man, let's find a more practical source of information. I need more hard facts and less wishy-washy talk. VES thought as he went back to the starting page of the galactic net. Interviews provided by mech pilots tended to be more direct. Since they weren't scientists, they didn't fear ridicule if they said something wrong. Eric is my partner for life. A female pilot gushed as she watched over the technicians servicing her damaged mech. I can't count how many times he saved my life. The more I pilot him, the more I become him. I put half my mind in his body every time I connect with the neural interface. I don't believe Eric hasn't learned a thing or two from me in all these years. There were many moments I got into trouble in the battlefield. If Eric hadn't mentally nudged me here and there, I might have never escaped those deadly moments. If it was legal to marry a mech, I'd already be standing here wearing my bridal dress. I don't know why I'm still alive. A wounded mech pilot rasped as he beheld the stumps of his arms. I knew I was a goner as soon as 3 bastards popped out of nowhere. My mate died, his cockpit blown apart before he could dodge. Something just snapped then. He was my friend, the partner I always shared my patrols with. Even our mechs had been a pair ever since they rolled off the factory. I guess my mech felt the same, because he fed his anger into me while I channeled my fury back into the frame. You know what happened next. We tore those bastards to shreds. A shaggy-haired prisoner of war sat down on a metal chair behind a metal table. He looked around the interrogation room with distaste. You want to know my secrets? You unfeeling murderers don't know the first thing about the mechs you're piloting. Have you ever rubbed your hands against them affectionately? Have you sat down next to their gigantic feet and tell them about the stars? Did you for one tiny moment stop murdering innocents long enough to treat your mechs like a person? I guess not. That's why I've been able to kill over 200 of you bastards with just me and my mech. Because I was never alone. I've chased after the oft-rumored X-Factor for my entire life. An elderly executive stated as he sat behind an imposing desk in his office. I bought and piloted over 3,000 mechs. Bipedal, quadrupedal, humanoid, avian, reptilian, whatever the shape, you can be sure I piloted it at least once. I've also painstakingly tracked down over 100 damaged, scrapped or second-hand mechs piloted by some of the most famed aces in the galaxy. All of them were excellent machines, especially after I restored them to their glory. So did you manage to fulfill your life's ambition? The old man smiled wistfully. Perhaps. Perhaps not. I certainly think that the X-Factor exists now more than ever. But is everyone fated for it? Perhaps us 3.5%ers are not the cream of the crop we believe to be. Maybe only 3.5% of the 3.5% of humanity possess the right aptitude to trigger the X-Factor. But these so-called superpotentates cannot all be blessed. They need the right mech to unearth their full potential. But that's just a random idea I'm tossing out, don't take it too seriously. A mech is lifeless. It isn't born, it's created. It doesn't die, it gets destroyed. A famed new rhubarb-than-ace pilot said as he resolutely stood before his mech in a hangar. All of these myths about the silly X-Factor are mistaken. I believe in the endless potential of the human heart. When one puts his body and soul to a single purpose, he can achieve 110% or even a 120% of his maximum potential. The mech is not the source, but the means in which we pilots can achieve miracles. I don't disrespect the pilots who believe in the X-Factor, but they attribute too much of their success to their mechs and not enough to their humanity. VES always believed mechs were machines. They were born for the purpose to be used, and if they failed to perform up to spec, then they'd be discarded as heartlessly as one would throw away a broken chair. You might feel some affection for sitting on it for years on end, but in the end it was just a piece of furniture. But now he came across plenty of hearsay that suggested that mechs were more than unfeeling tools. They had the capacity to think, to feel emotions, to make decisions on their own, even if only faintly. Was this what the system referred to as the X-Factor? Though skeptics provided plenty of viable alternatives, VES leaned more in favor to the idea that mechs could possess life. Still, his beliefs changed nothing by itself. His mission wasn't to uncover the mystery behind the X-Factor. Instead, he had to design a mech that incorporated the vaguely defined X-Factor. How the hell was he supposed to bring life to a mech? Then he remembered that he might have already touched the threshold. He activated the system and switched to his old designs. He called up the Seraphim's evaluation. The description commented on the Seraphim's fundamental attributes. Nothing in it hinted at anything metaphysical, yet the system still gave him an F in X-Factor. VES almost couldn't believe it. The Seraphim, a kludgy variant of the 400-year-old Fantasia model, carried the potential to ignite a mech pilot's performance beyond its pinnacle. What makes the Seraphim so special? The R2E, Phantasm, and Nomad are also based off the Fantasia, but why don't they have a whiff of X-Factor? The puzzled nagged at VES. He felt as if he had the pieces in front of him, but he just couldn't make it fit. He doubted spending more time in the galactic net would help. A lot of the people who researched it never experienced the X-Factor for themselves. Maybe he should find someone closer. He considered calling Melinda, but he didn't want to distract her from her work. Serving in the Bentheim Planetary Guard was a great honor for a pilot as young as her. VES already crossed the limit when he asked her to pass over information on the Caesar Augustus. I don't need to find a real pilot. Iron Spirit is supposed to simulate reality accurately. Can it also simulate the X-Factor? It was an interesting question that VES had no way of answering, but he was willing to bet the answer was favorable. He went to his store page and checked his sales log. Only 5 players bought the Seraphim. 4 of those only piloted the mech occasionally, with mixed results. Only 1 player piloted the Seraphim frequently and with considerable prowess. A bronze leaguer with the nickname the Seventh Snake. Chapter 17, Capture the Flag. Joshua drained the energy drink down his throat and tossed the can to the ground. A cleaning bot appeared out of nowhere to take the garbage away. Mom. I'm home. An elegant woman entered the foyer whilst carrying a babbling toddler. She approached the teenager and gave him a kiss on his forehead. Joshy baby. How was school? I'm not a kid anymore, Mom. Joshua whined as he avoided his mother's embrace. He ran up the stairs to his room. And I did fine in school. My mech trainer complimented me again today. That's good news. The higher your performance, the higher your rank when you become a reservist. Just don't join the mech corps. I'm not going to, Mom. Joshua said as he threw his bag on his bed. I'm going to play with the simulator again, okay? Don't forget about dinner again. Yes, Mom. After fending off his nagging mother, Joshua left his room and went downstairs. He took 2 flights down and entered the basement. Situated in a cooled and isolated room was his personal mech simulator pod for Iron Spirit. An expensive piece of machinery, it outperformed the rental pods at the game center. His parents even forked out the money to dig a secure set of cables to the nearest galactic net node in order to ensure his bandwidth never conked out. All of this turned Joshua's pod into the best performing unit on Cloudy Curtain. As Joshua entered the pod and let it close around him, he leaned his head back into the headrest that served as the neural interface. It hummed as it came to life, connecting Joshua's brain signals to the programs executed by the pod. The world changed. The cool steel walls of the simulator pod made way for a vibrant world. Many young men and women around his age walked through the digital streets of the starting area. Some sat next to fountains, watching the live streams of popular players that chose to broadcast in public. Others entered one of the many stores in order to shop for a new outfit. As for Joshua, he pulled up his friends list and tapped at one of the names to begin a dialogue. Yo Tops. Hey a snake. Triceratops greeted as his face appeared at the corner of Joshua's view. Up for another bout of arena. Joshua shook his head. I don't feel like it. The 1v1s and 2v2s have been getting kind of stale for me lately. I'm ready for something different. Oh. Triceratops mulled as he switched to matchmaking. You want to play Capture the Flag or Base Conquest? Let's do Capture the Flag. It's 5v5, so I feel my skill still matters in that game mode. The two paired up and entered matchmaking for Capture the Flag as a duo. They first received 3 random players to fill up their 5-man team. Hey fellas. Triceratops greeted his new teammates. Me and Snake here are pairing up as light mechs. Medium missile platform. The third player spoke, his tone conveying his distaste in further interaction. Okay. What about the rest? Heavy Knight. Just plant me next to our flag and I'll make sure anyone who takes it will be dead. The fourth player boasted. Defending the flag was the most traditional role in Capture the Flag and perfect for a heavy mech. Got any guns on your knight? Nope. But I'm faster than other knights. Great. Triceratops sighed. At least you can chase the enemy if someone manages to steal the flag from underneath us. So what about the last guy? I'm a girl, thank you. The young woman emphasized with a sneer. You just get out of my way. If you must know, I'm piloting a Genesis 18. The medium spider mech. So you do have more than 3 brain cells. Congratulations, doofus. Haha. Triceratops deadpanned. Well, our team's a little light on weight, but we're very mobile. Let's do a 4-to-1. 3-to-2, the Missler interjected. My mech's a glass cannon. I'm best at supporting the heavy knight and providing long-range missile support. I'm attacking from the rear. The spider girl said. I work best if I can sneak up to them alone, so don't you dare follow me. Triceratops sighed again. Joshua, or the 7th snake, consoled him in a private chat. Don't bother too much. Getting your teammates work together like we learned at school doesn't always work. A lot of players just want to blow off steam. God, I hope they make an effort then. My win rate for capture the flag is already in the dump due to getting teamed up with egoistic morons. The matchmaking system released a bell, signifying a successful search of an opposing team. The screen changed into a small lobby where their team could inspect the enemy's loadout while the random battlefield loaded in the background. The 7th snake analyzed the enemy's team composition and felt a headache forming. The enemy team has a 3-person pre-made. They're all kitted with the same heavy mechs. He didn't recognize the variants, but they looked a lot like the strikers he fought the other day. One of them carries a bunch of close-ranged heat projectors. The other transformed his arms into medium-ranged ballistic cannons. The last guy appears to be their long-ranged marksman with his jumbo-sized laser rifle. It was a composition that lacked mobility but possessed power in spades. Relying on their tough armor and plentiful energy reserves, they could bulldoze anything in their way. The 2 randoms pulled in their team adjusted to the trio and came with their light mechs. Triceratops noted. 1 aerial scout and 1 saboteur. That's plenty of mobility for them to plug their gaps. The 7th snake shook his head. Not really. You can be sure the 3 meatheads will stick together. We're either going to face a heavy push or a full-on defense. If they keep turtle up in their base, I can bombard them with impunity behind a hill. The Missler said curtly. And if their team attacks, their flag will only be defended by 2 lights. The map finished loading, causing everyone to appear in a small open fort. A lengthy flagpole stuck out from the middle of the parade ground. All right, let's move. The spider mech girl crawled over the walls with her 8 limbs and disappeared from their view. The Missler took off in the other direction while the heavy knight planted its feet right next to the flag. Triceratops followed the 7th snake on the ground as he flew up in the air. The first thing we need to do is find the 3 heavies and figure out what they're up to. The 7th snake spoke to his fellow teammates. Me and Tops will scout the enemy first. As a flyer, Snake Seraphim traversed the forest prairie environment with effortless grace. Tops' phantasm could only slink through the trees as third as fast. However, the ground mech was able to minimize its emissions to stay hidden while the flyer radiated heat and also color as its iconic cloud generator spewed clouds of vapor. The 7th snake didn't care if he got spotted by the enemy first. Even as his Seraphim extended its sensor hair in the flowing wind, he was pretty much waiting to get shot at. After piloting the Seraphim for many hours, he grew confident in his ability to dodge. The 7th snake got distracted as a strange notification popped up. Someone is spectating me. That's strange. Oh well, as long as he isn't feeding information to my opponents, I don't care. A barrage of laser fire shot from a cloud. Some of the beams scorched the 7th snake's armor, thankfully not damaging anything essential. I'm under fire by their air scout. Engaging. Tops, keep searching for their heavies, don't let this distraction fool you. Triceratops nodded as his phantasm kept combing the surrounding area. Roger that, pal. My ground-to-air missiles are ready to fire. The Missler interrupted. Maintain contact and feed your target lock to me. No, stay out of this fight. I can handle this fellow myself. Don't reveal your position. The Seraphim flared its wings and juked side to side as it fired back with its light DMR. The jerky lateral movements made it hard to hit by the enemy lightweight, but the long-ranged rifle also scored very little hits. That was okay, because Snake increased his speed and approached with fury. His heart pumped faster and his brain went into a heightened state. His Seraphim holstered the rifle on his back, which was difficult with the wings in the way, and retrieved a pair of heated knives. Like the fangs of a predator, he wielded them in a reserve grip and rocketed in a charging attack towards the enemy flyer. The enemy mech panicked a bit as it had been loaded for long to medium-range harassment. The pilot felt much less confident in melee than the enemy, so he flew back and engaged his mech's thrusters in order to escape the approaching rainbow mech. Death! The seventh Snake yelled as he exerted his Seraphim to the utmost, managing to slowly close the distance at the cost of overheating his mech's wings. I can take it. My mech is meant to rule the skies. The enemy mech dove downwards in order to gain more speed and perhaps seek help from its allies on the ground. However, the Seraphim anticipated the move and accelerated just a split second earlier. The brilliant decision allowed it to close the distance just enough for Snake to feel the opposing mech's heat. You're mine now. The light mech gave up escape and flipped in the air, presenting its medium-powered laser rifle at him. The Seraphim crossed its arms just as the lasers pelted its form, causing a lot more spots to blacken and melt away. The enemy mech evidently overheated its rifle, sacrificing its endurance for a massive boost in firepower. It's too late. Snake yelled as he made his Seraphim spin. The rotation allowed it to dodge the last set of lasers while adding momentum to its poised and outstretched knives. The light mech extended its rifle in desperation, blocking with its bulk. One heated knife snapped right through its body, shearing the weapon into slag. The other knife passed around the weapon and scored a deep blow in the shoulder, practically crippling the mech's left arm. The Seraphim finished delivering its attacks, leaving it open for the light mech's kick. The feeble attack hardly damaged the Seraphim, but it successfully pushed it away, leaving the half-crippled mech enough space to continue to fall. Instead of chasing after its prey, the Seraphim holstered its knives and brought its rifle back to its arms. With a calm and steady aim, the Seraphim fired a constant stream of energy bolts. The first bolts went wide, but as the light mech failed to adjust in time, the next bolts hit its wings. The damage was light, but it disrupted the operation of its wings. The light mech posed an easier target now that its speed reduced. The subsequent energy bolts shredded the rest of the light mech's wings, leaving it incapable of correcting its fall. Their aerial scout is doomed. The seventh Snake stated as he watched the smoking mech crash into the ground and explode. What's the situation down on the ground? Their saboteur is good. The spider mech girl responded. He got 2 of my legs, but he hasn't come out unscathed. Don't bother me. Let me focus on the duel. Their heavies are attacking our base. I'm having a hard time keeping them off our flag. The heavy knight gasped. Mr. Missile Fan is helping, but I really need more help. Triceratops also filled in his status. I've taken their flag since Spider Mech is doing a good job keeping their remaining light mech occupied. I can either help her out or go back to base. I won't be able to deliver the flag with the heavy boys around. Return to base. We need to destroy at least 2 out of 3 of those heavies in order to give you an opening to deliver the flag. The Seraphim flew back to base while the flag-carrying Phantasm ran across the terrain while holding a large flag. The seventh Snake assessed his mech's damage and energy reserves, and concluded it could withstand one more all-in assault. Damn it. They got my sword arm. I'm only left with my shield now. Hang on, I'm coming. The seventh Snake responded as he broke through the clouds and flew over his team's base. His sensors rapidly detected the glowing hot forms of the enemy trio. The close-ranged heat-projecting enemy pinned down the heavy knight whilst slowly melting its armor. The medium-ranged ballistic gunner had succeeded in blowing off the heavy knight's sword arm and now went to work on its legs. As for the long-ranged marksman, it had already circled round the sides to suppress their missiler. To his credit, the missiler used its superior mobility to stay one step ahead of the enemy marksman, taking advantage of the surrounding hills to keep out of its line of sight. All the while, it fired sporadic volleys of arcing missiles onto the other 2 heavy mechs with the help of the telemetry the heavy knight sent back. The missiles hadn't inflicted any critical damage to the 2 mechs, but the frequent explosions degraded their sensors and stripped much of their top-facing armor. The 2 bruisers were so engrossed in bullying the heavy knight that the Seraphim was practically able to position itself at their rear. It then dived down in a descending, heart-stopping powered fall. The seventh Snake overcharged his DMR, causing its chamber to accumulate so much energy that smoke started to escape. He even overloaded his rear side cloud generator so that it created a vast rainbow wake that approached the unsuspecting two mechs like the front of a tsunami. The heavy knight's facing allowed it to see the oncoming attack, and fell slack for a second, which proved to be a fatal mistake as a cannon shell ripped apart its right leg, causing the mech to lose its balance. The heat-projecting mech pounced on the vulnerability while the cannoneer reloaded its shells with the confidence his target was already dead. Just as it was in the middle of swapping its magazine, the cannoneer somehow felt an invisible pressure form from its rear. After switching to the rear sensor feeds, it suddenly noticed a gigantic attack coming from the air. Death! The seventh snake bellowed as he aimed and fired a humongous energy bolt at the flat-footed cannon mech. The bolt zapped through the air like a hot knife through butter. The huge ball of energy splashed against the mech's rifle, coincidentally also damaging its magazine, causing it to explode in a devastating ripple. The bolt fell apart with most of its energy dispersing in the air, but some of the damage landed on the mech's front, ruining its surface internals. The seventh snake had already decoupled and tossed aside his slagged rifle. With his twin-heated knives he struck the damaged and bleeding mech in its head and upper torso. He landed with so much momentum behind him that the knives tore through the remnants of the heavy mech's armor and ruined several of its critical systems, the most important of which was the power reactor embedded near the heart area. The cannoneer, now cut off from power, shut itself off. Snake Seraphim landed its delicate legs against the disabled mech's chest and bent its knees to mitigate its falling momentum. That left it open to the remaining heavy mech. The heat projector ignored the heavy knight that had been slagged into a molten statue, and ran back to avenge his comrade. With his Seraphim already running hot like an oven, even a glancing hit by the wide-area heat projectors could cause Snake to be boiled alive in his own mech. Acutely aware of the impending crisis, the seventh snake acted in desperation. In a feat of exemplary control, the Seraphim spread its legs like a stripper and leveraged its grip on the embedded knives to spin around the unpowered mech's torso. The air flashed with white-hot heat and the projectors fired. The cannon mech's ruined armor suffered a catastrophic amount of damage while some of its internals even caught fire. The Seraphim's exposed legs also melted into a half-puddle shape, rendering them incapable of supporting the light mech's weight. However, the seventh snake managed to preserve his mech's waist and upper body. The Seraphim leaned over, using the burning cannoneer as a shield, and did something stupid. It threw its knives at its opponent. The heat-projecting mech got startled and hastily tried to angle its armor against the incoming projectiles, only for them to fall short and land on the ground. The heat projector grew enraged, and stomped over with his lumbering mech while firing its heat weapon without regard. The seventh snake continued to make his mech hug the increasingly hotter cannon mech, hoping desperately that it would last. Tops. Got it. The heat projector inadvertently walked away from the center. This left the waiting Triceratops a narrow window of approach. His phantasm swiftly but quietly climbed over the walls of their fort and made a beeline to the center where his own team's flag also rested. Noticing his mistake, the heat projector's pilot commanded his mech to turn its torso. With his pair of heat projectors poised to fire, the phantasm was bound to suffer greatly. That was until the seventh snake managed to pry off his battered and half-molten Seraphim away from its shield. With a disabled pair of legs, the Seraphim nevertheless crawled forward with all the strength its feeble arms could muster. It approached underneath the distracted heavy mech and reached out to grab on the heat projectors. The Seraphim succeeded in spoiling one of the heat projector's aim. It unleashed much of its molten fury harmlessly against the ground. The other heat projector succeeded in hitting the phantasm. However, the phantasm suffered no damage beforehand, and with only one projector achieving a hit, the phantasm maintained its ability to move. With a limping run, Triceratops succeeded in planting the enemy's flag right next to their team's unconquered banner. Yes. Woohoo! You interrupted my duel. While his teammates cheered and grumbled, the seventh snake sank back in his cockpit with a satisfied expression. He could feel the victory invigorating him even as he felt as if the excessive heat had cooked him into a crispy state. We won. The seventh snake smiled as he let out a warm and deep breath. I'm getting better at this, though my Seraphim won't be happy I trashed it again. Then he remembered someone had spectated him throughout the entire match. The seventh snake opened his personal page and switched to his stream. He read out the name of his only spectator. Chasing Clouds. That sounds familiar. Chapter 18, Life. Watching the seventh snake's replays impressed VES. The mech pilot's flamboyant piloting of his Seraphim showed a remarkable mastery of its capabilities. The Seraphim domineeringly claimed the skies, fighting particularly well against other flyers, and launched aggressive attacks against opponents on the ground. Though VES knew little of mech piloting, he still recognized the Seventh Snake's remarkable skill. His aggressive play style and continuous risk-taking hid a keen sense of timing. If this snake wasn't at the threshold of promoting to silver, he was absolutely in the upper tier of Bronze League. When VES noted that the Seventh Snake had come online and entered matchmaking, he chose to spectate his match. What he saw of the young pilot's performance reaffirmed his judgment. Snake piloted the Seraphim in ways even VES hadn't imagined. But does he have the X factor? Good piloting didn't necessarily mean one has the X factor. Disregarding the phenomenon's vague definition, the X factor might not even work in a virtual reality environment. Perhaps the Seventh Snake was only a good pilot, and nothing more. Still, VES believed it would be beneficial to his understanding of his mechs if he had a talk with the pilot. When VES initiated a call, the mech pilot answered immediately. "Hello. I saw you spectating my last match. Who are you?" "I'm the mech designer who created the Seraphim variant you're piloting." "Wow." The pilot gasped. "No wonder I found your nickname familiar. So you're the famous Fantasia customizer. I'm researching a new project, and I need some feedback from the people who pilot my older work. Can you spare me a moment of your time?" "Yes." VES was taken aback at the Seventh Snake's enthusiasm. This was the first time since he became a mech designer that someone afforded him respect. "Hey, calm down, kid. I just want your thoughts on some stuff, so don't be too stiff," VES told the player, hoping he wouldn't be paralyzed into silence. "Let me ask you my first question. Your records show that you've been piloting the Seraphim ever since you bought it. What makes you stick with the model? I think you must have realized by now that it isn't the best mech in its weight class." The Seventh Snake paused as he tried to formulate his words. "I can't describe it. I never thought about replacing my Seraphim. I love it far too much to get rid of it. The mechs that I've piloted before are all good machines, but they don't fit my style." "What do you mean when you use the word style?" VES asked, wondering if it had anything to do with the X factor. "My play style. My way of fighting. Something like that. The Seraphim just clicks with me in a way no other flyer could. It's like we're part of the same brain wave. I can feel my passion engulfing the entire mech when I'm deeply engaged in a fight. No other mech can make me feel this good." "All right. Let me ask you something else. Have you ever experienced a moment where your mech gave you a push? For example, did the mech warn you of danger while you were unaware of it? Were there moments when you thought doing something was impossible, but you still managed to achieve it because your mech gave you a helping hand?" The Seventh Snake fell into silence. "I don't recall any moments like that. I'm always in full control of my mech. What I'm pretty sure of is I feel more at ease with the Seraphim. It's easier to play at my best when I'm piloting the Seraphim than with any other mech. I've even bought your Phantasm and Nomad models, but I never could get quite as comfortable when I play with them. Maybe it's the lack of wings. I've fallen in love with flying." VES asked the Seventh Snake some other questions. What distinguished a good pilot and a great one? Are mechs better when they are smaller or larger? Does he believe in metaphysics? The young pilot's answer revealed no surprises. The boy wasn't aware of the X factor, nor did he seek to pursue anything magical. VES formed an image of the young potentate. Young, wealthy, and well-trained, his view of the mech world had been colored by the many teachings of his tutors. It was therefore no surprise that they avoided telling him about the X factor. A young man like him had no business chasing after a fantasy. "I have one last question." VES wrapped up the interview. "Try to take a moment before you answer this. Do you believe your mech is alive?" I don't know." The Seventh Snake replied with a confused expression. He scratched his head, trying to recall the times when he piloted the Seraphim. "I'm not delusional. Of course it's not alive. The Seraphim's a great mech, but it doesn't have an AI as far as I know. What I can say is that piloting my Seraphim makes me feel more alive than anything else." "All right. Thank you for taking the time to tell me about your experiences. Goodbye. I hope I helped. You certainly did, don't worry about it. Can I ask you something before you go? Are you going to put more one-star mechs on the market? VES shook his head. I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I don't plan to do so. I've sold most of my one-star licenses, so I can't construct any new one-star mechs. My hands are kind of full trying to start up my real universe mech business. Oh, so you're a real mech designer? No wonder. That's not to say I still don't have a use for Iron Spirit. VES responded carefully, naturally not mentioning that earning massive DP was his main reason for sticking around. Once I earn some revenue, I'm transitioning to 2-star mechs. The profit margin is better in that tier. He would also have an easier time to reach beyond his limited customer base in Cloudy Curtain. In a few months, he'd hopefully gain enough skills to produce a competitive design. After shutting down the game, VES stood up and stretched his limbs, mentally re-examining the interview. The seventh snake spoke with a peculiar accent that reminded him of the officials working in the capital of Cloudy Curtain. Despite his good upbringing, the young potentate described his piloting in the same vague way as the veterans did when describing their incredible feats that others thought involved the X Factor. In other words, the interview provided inconclusive results. VES hadn't come much closer to understanding the elusive X Factor. Was it some kind of energy that hid inside a mech? Was it some evolutionary catalyst that manifested in only a couple of pilots? There's one thing all interviews about the X Factor have in common. Love. Affection. Grief. Vengeance. Whatever was the case, most of the extraordinary performances mentioned in the Galactic Net were backed by strong and unrestrained emotions. It seemed unrelated. What do emotions have to do with the performance of a mech? That's like suggesting that an aircar can fly faster if the driver felt happy or angry. It made no sense. But an aircar doesn't have a neural interface. VES remarked as he thought he found a clue. The neural interface allows mech pilots to receive sensory input from the mech, allowing them to treat the frame like it's their own body. Any decision a mech pilot makes is sent as output through the same interface, thus causing the mech to move according to its commands. VES went back to his terminal and sought out a few articles about the neural interface. The neural interface was a highly restricted and highly controlled piece of hardware. Under no circumstances did any manufacturer allow the neural interface to leak out unnecessary signals. Excessive sensory input would overload a pilot's brains, while excessive movement output would cause the mech to lose control. The neural interface was strictly programmed to detect and block unauthorized signals, and technicians checked them frequently if they weren't tampered with. Pretty much every mech designer and technician trusted the neural interface to work as advertised. If thousands of industry insiders are sure there's nothing fishy with the neural interface, then it's not the source of the X Factor. Emotions also elicit brain signals, and since those were different from the sensory and movement signals, they were explicitly blocked by the neural interface. But what if those signals are inseparable? Could emotions be conveyed through the same signals, therefore making it impossible for the neural interface to filter them out? For example, if a mech held a sword over a fallen enemy, did its pilot's desire to kill his opponent get blended in with the same signal that commanded the mech to thrust down its sword? If a mech spotted missiles flying in its direction, did an emotion like fear accompany its sensor signals of the incoming threat? Unfortunately, VES had no background in the neural sciences. Everything he learned about the neural interface in college was how to install it and how to maintain it. A designer had no need to know how the gadget worked in order to use it in their designs. This left VES unable to answer this question. I don't think all those other people who have hunted down the X Factor are that stupid. If someone like me can think of it, I'm sure they exhausted themselves to death trying to see if the neural interface was capable of doing more. In the end, VES was stuck again. With no solid theory on how to achieve the X Factor, VES had no starting point in designing a mech that incorporated it. With the huge interest payment looming over him, time began to run out for him. He could not waste the remaining days on a fruitless quest. Lucky chose this time to barge inside. With a nonchalant walk, the mechanical cat dropped the shiny blue sapphire before V's feet. It then nuzzled his legs with its slim but lively body. Another gem I see. At least you didn't bury it in the backyard again. VES picked up the sparkling blue gem and inspected it briefly before storing it in a small safe. Good job, buddy. VES took a break. He picked up his gem cat and sank down on a sofa. He scratched the cat's metallic hide, not really sure if the cat even felt his fingers, but sure acting like it did. Lucky closed its eyes as it lay down comfortably on V's lap. As he looked at Lucky, a strange thought inserted in his head. Are you alive? The cat kept purring as if he didn't understand the question. But VES knew the gem cat was smarter than he looked. It possessed an AI way more sophisticated than the thoughts of an average household cat. What is life? The age-old question of life engendered a lot of controversy over the years. Many scientists mentioned that life had the ability to learn, adapt, and reproduce. These clinical definitions of life try to encompass all manner of life, including even the tiniest bacteria. That made the definition far too broad to be of use in this situation. Instead, VES wondered if Lucky could be called a living being. Sure, he probably couldn't mate with another mechanical cat, but Lucky was no different from any other pet. Whether Lucky's responses formed spontaneously or through a large script of possible responses, it didn't matter. Humans worked in the same way if one pulled up their microscopes and sunk deeper into a person's cells and DNA. I don't care what the scientists and experts say. Since you're capable of expressing your emotions, you're alive in my book. VES was also pretty certain the key to unlocking the X factor lay in emotions. If Lucky could express emotions like love, hate, fear and disgust, why not a mech? Certainly, a mech didn't possess the programming to ferment such redundant thoughts in the eyes of scientists. But what if a mech bypassed the neural blockade? It could borrow the pilot's complex neural system to form its own emotions. Since the mech neurally connected to its pilot's brain, its emotions mirrored the pilot's own feelings. A mech's anger would neatly mirror its pilot's own hostility towards an opponent. This would only enhance a pilot's current mood and not display anything abnormal in the neural interface. I'm kind of reaching out there. How can a novice designer like me get it right while countless of experts miss this gap? At this point, VES stopped caring about the opinions of others. He kept it simple. Lucky is alive. The system is also a living being. If these two entities are capable of life, then I believe that mechs can also live. If he presented these words to one of the researchers who studied the X factor for decades, he'd be laughed and ridiculed at. It was a stupid-sounding argument that relied entirely on subjective anecdotal experience. But when he looked down and stroked Lucky's back, he felt no regrets. I can't phrase it in any better way, but my faulty logic doesn't matter. My belief is enough. My heart tells me I'm looking in the right direction, and that's good enough. Now, VES had finally obtained a somewhat coherent picture of the relation between life and the X factor. He felt as if a weight had disappeared. Now I have to put theory into practice. VES was ready to design a new mech. One that hopefully unlocked the X factor. Chapter 19, Reborn. VES revisited the CA-1A Nero. He was never proud of the mech, even if he learned a lot about the Caesar Augustus when working on it. The small solutions he implemented in the Nero only helped him fabricate a less horrible Caesar Augustus. In that regard, he succeeded modestly. When VES checked his sales again, he saw that the Nero had already been sold once for a whole 60,000 credits. At least I don't have to worry about paying for the raw materials of my next model. The Nero always felt like a half-finished job to VES. Now that he came back with a lot of new ideas, he wanted to revisit its design and see whether he could transform it into a mech that enables pilots to reach the X factor. VES opened up the Mech Designer system and switched to the Designer page. The designer stored all of his old designs, so he pulled up the Nero effortlessly. When he modified the CA-1's design, he made changes based revolving around reducing its cost and increasing its efficiency. He treated the Caesar Augustus as a robot and rearranged its internals without any regards to its presumably non-existent feelings. VES wasn't sure working like that was the right approach. In his beliefs about the X factor, emotions played an important role. While he still wasn't certain how to engender these emotions in a giant machine, he had some guesses he could try. First, he theorized a mech designer's emotions and intentions played an enabling role. In other words, his own feelings bled over into the design and fabrication of a new mech. The clues to this idea came from remembering the circumstances of designing the Seraphim. Ice-cold designers who barely put any passion in their designs could never spark a semblance of life in these mechs. When VES worked on the Phantasm, Nomad and Nero, he constantly tried to maximize his gains while minimizing his losses. Though he was upbeat, he didn't put in an excessive amount of passion in his work. Despite being overburdened with toys, the Seraphim had been designed in a fit of passion. VES vaguely remembered the emotions he experienced back then. He became elated at his first sale, and the completion of his second-ever tutorial missions. He received a windfall of resources and also got drunk on purchasing a lot of virtual component licenses. With such an affected mind, he got straight to work at designing a colorful mech that embodied extreme joy and passion. These all happened to be the same emotions the Seventh Snake felt when he performed at his best. VES formed a bold idea. The alignment of the emotions expressed by the designer, mech and pilot determined whether they could produce the X-Factor. Almost every speculation about the X-Factor VES had read on the galactic net only focused on the mech and its pilot. It almost never included the designer. Even if they did, they focused on the designer's physical objectives, not his emotional demands. How can a sword in the hands of a warrior shine bright when the blacksmith forged it casually? There was no proof for V's assertion that the craftsman mattered. As far as humanity knew, emotions weren't bundles of energy that had a definable existence in a material universe. It certainly sounded highly unlikely that when VES designed and fabricated the Seraphim, he somehow embedded it with some sort of voodoo mental energy. No. Perhaps the mystery lay in purpose and intent. The strong emotions of the mech designer sharpened his intent. A mech designed to break through fortifications would not only possess the physical qualities that enabled it to perform such a task, it would also be built carrying the designer's intent to succeed. Paired with a pilot who carries the same wish, such a mech crystallized the intent of all three entities in a single machine. In order to gift the new Nero with a purpose, VES first had to look back on the intent of its base model. The Caesar Augustus is a product of a young, spoiled mech designer's desire to show off. VES concluded as he recalled the debut of Jason Kozlowski. At the time, it was built to be the best all-rounder current in mech. Jason obviously hadn't been modest in his demands. However, he possessed one thing many other mech designers lacked. He was incredibly passionate when he designed the Caesar Augustus. The heir to National Aeromotives made a bet that he'd produce the design in a month. If Jason spent only 1 month to come up with a completely original design with so much pressure hanging over him, the emotions that he carried over in his creations would be immense. I've done a disservice to the Caesar Augustus. VES realized as he recalled the times when he fabricated the virtual versions of the stock model and the Nero. Even though he crafted them in a simulation, the lifelike circumstances meant that the frustrations and difficulties he felt must have bled over to his end products. I need to adjust my mood. Redesigning the new Nero without emulating Jason's passion will just deliver another half-assed result. VES felt as if he was forced to go up to a stage and begin acting while he had zero experience. The only thing he could do is recall the times when he was still young and bright, before his moody teenage years set in. He used to dream of following in his father's footsteps and become a mech pilot. I was naive back then. Naive but happy. Much like how Jason felt 30 years ago when he just graduated from Estalon. While he didn't succeed in summoning up a youthful and arrogant mood, VES somewhat managed to instill confidence in himself. I don't have anything great to draw upon in my past, but with the help of the system I can still dream of the wonders I'll experience in the future. The Caesar Augustus' main attribute was exuding absolute confidence. Jason believed the mech he designed was the best of the current generation. It surpassed any frontline or elite mech within the same technological boundary. Only the most advanced next-gen models carefully developed and kept hidden by the first-tier states could beat it in a fair fight, and those mechs were usually kept hidden from the public, employed only in the most frigid battles by the geniuses of the largest empires. In other words, the Caesar Augustus had reason to be arrogant. After matching his confident mood with the arrogant and narcissistic mindset behind the Caesar Augustus, VES went to work making adjustments to the Nero. Naturally, in the perspective of improving the Nero's physical capabilities, he only had limited options. He hadn't learned any new sub-skills since the time he designed the Nero, after all. He also couldn't undo all of his work in the misguided intention to emulate Jason. Instead, he sought to bring back the charm of the base model. VES had originally smoothed out the minute incongruities Jason incorporated in CA-1's armor. He used to regard them as sloppy flourishes that added nothing of value. Now he noted the seemingly useless contours enhanced its domineering image. Next, he paid attention to its internals. The changes he made to produce the original Nero were minor optimizations. They reduced the risk of catastrophic faults and made the mech easier to maintain, but the underlying idea behind the changes was that he made the mech more timid. Jason designed the CA-1 to be a show-stopping elite, focusing purely on its martial prowess and not nearly enough attention to its practicality. VES somehow had to reconcile two opposite intents. One was the need to make the Nero more practical to maintain and repair. The other was to retain the Caesar Augustus aggressive edge. The way VES decided to go about it was to revert a couple of changes and implement a couple of new ones. The Caesar Augustus emphasized confidence to the point of recklessness. The Nero emphasized self-preservation to the point of timidity. Therefore, the Nero Redivitus should be focused on competence that its systems could take a better beating. Essentially, VES left out much of the arrogance embedded in the base model. Since he hadn't made any major changes, VES finished updating his Nero after only half a day. After VES added in the finishing touches, he let the system evaluate his redesigned variant. He aptly named it the Nero Redivivus, after a somewhat dubious legends that the ancient Roman emperor rose from the dead. VES imagined he succeeded in bringing his older work back to life. Design Evaluation, CA-1B Nero Redivivus. Variant Name, CA-1B Nero Redivivus. Base Model, Caesar Augustus CA-1. Original Manufacturer, National Aeromotives. Weight Classification, Medium Heavy. Recommended Role, Elite Vanguard. Armor, A. Carrying Capacity, C-. Aesthetics, B. Endurance, D. Energy Efficiency, D+. Flexibility, E. Firepower, B+. Mobility, D+. Spotting, C-. X Factor, E-. Deviance, 4%. Performance Improvement, 3%. Overall Evaluation, a customized design that barely improves on the original. While it is slightly easier to fabricate and repair, this variant offers barely any benefits. Rare among other variants, this design has not butchered the base model's X factor. Instead, it has retained a shadow of its presence. You have received 50 design points completing an original design of a last-generation mech. You have received 100 design points for designing a mech with a trace of X factor. Yes. I did just enough to get it to work. VES rejoiced, happy for reaching the finish line just as he put in so much work. The windfall of DP he received also helped. At least VES received some indication from the system that his attempts to recreate the vaunted X factor succeeded. I haven't wasted all of my time. VES waited for a moment, but nothing else had happened. System. I've completed the mission. Won't you give me the rewards? Please continue fabricating your design in order to complete the mission. Regardless of the Nero Redivivus inadequacies, it offered the possibility to unleash the X factor, but evidently the possibility wasn't enough. He had to prove its existence by making the design come to life. I'm pretty sure the mission stated that designing a mech should be enough. Do you just want me to finish what I started? It didn't hurt to practice. I might as well do it. But first, let's spend my DP. Enough time had passed for his Fantasia variants to sell several hundred times, though their sales trend started to decline. And while VES only managed to sell the Caesar Augustus and the Nero once, their higher tiers resulted in more DP when they were sold. Together with the DP he received as a reward for designing the Nero Redivitus, VES saved enough points to purchase the medium-weight armor optimization I sub-skill in the skill tree. I'd rather purchase the 3D printer proficiency 2 upgrade since I still have trouble reproducing the Caesar Augustus parts, but I really need to learn how to work with armor once I receive the new license. It was a matter of priorities. Without becoming more proficient in modifying armor, he might fail in adapting the new armor to the Caesar Augustus. He'd be wasting the valuable license if he botched the design. He checked his status again to see if anything else had changed. Design points, 74. Concentration, 1.1. Metaphysics, incompetent. Physics, novice, lightweight armor optimization I, medium weight armor optimization I. Evaluation, achieved a step into novice territory. Surprisingly, he gained some benefits from his focused research. The long hours he spent reading and watching interviews rose his concentration by 0.1 points. The scattered but varied theories he learned and formulated by himself also gained acknowledgement by the system, resulting in a new sub-skill called metaphysics. Seems like you acknowledge that metaphysics has merit. VES remarked coyly at the system. It didn't deign to reply. Shrugging, VES switched back to his skill tree and saw that the metaphysics subtrees were under a special condition. He spotted plenty of icons, but fog shrouded their names and descriptions. He also couldn't spend his DP to unlock them. He wasn't allowed to cheat his way into mastering the X factor. This only underscored its value. Well, he could figure it out later. First he had to fabricate the Nero Redivitus in order to prove his assumptions and complete the mission. First, I need to get in the right mindset again. I can't treat the fabrication process as a chore. He began work on fabricating the new Nero whilst keeping a confident, trusting attitude. This wasn't always easy to keep up for hours. VES frequently took breaks in order to keep his mood fresh. This caused him to take twice as long to finish the Nero Redivitus, but when he finally read through the testing and diagnostics of the completed model, he gained a pleasant surprise. Despite his fumbling, the Nero Redivitus had actually improved. Its construction went a little smoother, causing less substandard parts to pop up. This improvement helped along the assembly process, where VES spent much less time wrangling ill-fitting parts into a hole. I'm finally done with this. VES sighed. He visited his store page, removed the first Nero from his catalog, and added in the Nero Redivitus to take its place. The system finally gave VES what he deserved. Congratulations for completing the mission. The road to understanding the X factor is long and bumpy. There are many destinations at the end of the road. Believe in yourself and advance towards the endpoint unique to you. You have received a 10-year random medium armor production license lottery ticket. Please visit the lottery page to redeem your ticket. You have received a 200-ton medium armor raw materials package. Please visit your inventory to open the package. VES was already filled with glee. My luck's been bad lately. The heavens must surely compensate me this time. Hopefully I won't encounter another pagoda. Part 2 of the series ends here. Thank you for watching and listening. If you find it interesting, please give us a like, a comment and a subscription so that we have the motivation to make the next videos.